The Soul Drinkers chapter emerged from the gene laboratories of Terra during one of the later foundings of the Adeptus Astartes, their genetic heritage tracing back to the stalwart lineage of Rogel Dorn and his Imperial Fists Legion. Unlike many successor chapters whose founding dates remain meticulously recorded in the archives of the Administratum, the Soul Drinkers' origins exist within a deliberate shroud of bureaucratic obscurity. Imperial records indicate their creation occurred sometime during the middle millennia of the 40th millennium, though the exact founding number remains classified or lost to the vagaries of administrative decay that plague the Imperium's vast record-keeping apparatus. The chapter's gene seed bore the unmistakable markers of Dorn's legacy, the missing Becher's gland, and Susan membrane that marked all sons of the Praetorian of Terra. Yet from their earliest days, the Soul Drinkers displayed characteristics that set them apart from their parent chapter and fellow successors. Where the Imperial Fists excelled in siege warfare and defensive operations, the Soul Drinkers gravitated toward a more aggressive, close-quarters approach to warfare that would eventually define their combat doctrine for millennia to come. Their initial deployment saw them assigned to the Segmentum Solar, operating from a fleet-based configuration while they established their territorial claims and identified suitable worlds for recruitment and fortress construction. The chapter's early campaigns took them across multiple star systems, where they distinguished themselves in boarding actions against orc raiders and close-quarters urban warfare against heretical cults that had taken root in the underhives of industrial worlds. These formative battles shaped their tactical preferences and began the development of their unique approach to psychological warfare. The Soul Drinkers eventually claimed the world of Selaka as their primary recruiting ground, a harsh desert planet whose population had been hardened by centuries of tribal warfare and resource scarcity. The planet's unforgiving environment and warrior culture provided ideal candidates for transformation into Astartes, producing recruits who possessed both the physical resilience and mental fortitude necessary for the chapter's demanding training regimens. Selaka's tribal societies practiced ritualistic combat and maintained oral traditions that emphasized honor through battle, cultural elements that resonated with the Soul Drinkers' developing identity. Their fortress monastery, designated as the Brokenback, took shape within the hull of a massive space-going vessel that had been extensively modified and expanded over centuries of construction. Rather than establishing a traditional planetary stronghold, the Soul Drinkers chose to maintain their fleet-based heritage while using the Brokenback as their primary base of operations. The fortress ship contained all the facilities necessary for chapter operations: gene seed storage vaults, training chambers, weapons manufactories, and the sacred spaces required for the chapter's developing ritual practices. The chapter's recruitment process extended beyond Selaka to include several other worlds within their designated operational zone. These secondary recruiting grounds included the hive world of Stratix Lumini, where the Soul Drinkers drew candidates from the planet's underhive gangs and military academies, and the feral world of Gravenhold, whose population of hunter-gatherers provided recruits with exceptional tracking and survival skills. This diverse recruitment base contributed to the chapter's tactical flexibility and helped establish their reputation for adaptability in varied combat environments. During their early centuries of service, the Soul Drinkers developed their distinctive combat doctrine through practical experience and careful study of their enemies' psychological vulnerabilities. They observed that many opponents, particularly human heretics and Xenos species with advanced cognitive capabilities, could be demoralized and disrupted through targeted psychological pressure applied during close-quarters engagements. This insight led to the development of specialized techniques that combined traditional Astartes shock tactics with deliberate psychological manipulation designed to break enemy morale before physical combat commenced. The chapter's approach to psychological warfare extended beyond simple intimidation tactics. Soul Drinkers squads trained extensively in urban combat environments, learning to use architecture, lighting, and sound to create disorienting effects that would confuse and terrify their enemies. They developed specialized equipment modifications that enhanced the psychological impact of their presence, including Vox amplifiers that could project distorted battle cries and helmet modifications that created unsettling visual effects during combat. These techniques proved particularly effective against cultist forces and poorly disciplined military units. Their relationship with the Adeptus Mechanicus began during the chapter's second century of operation, when they encountered a Mechanicus expedition that had discovered an ancient cache of Dark Age technology on a dead world in the Ghoul Stars region. The Soul Drinkers provided military support for the expedition's extraction operations, fighting off Orc raiders and unknown Xenos threats that had been drawn to the Archaeotech site. In recognition of their assistance, the Mechanicus granted the chapter access to several pieces of recovered technology, including advanced weapon systems and armor modifications that would become integral to their operational capabilities. This initial cooperation led to a more formal relationship between the Soul Drinkers and specific Mechanicus Forge worlds, particularly those specializing in weapons research and development. The chapter's willingness to field test experimental equipment and provide detailed combat reports made them valuable partners for Mechanicus tech priests seeking to validate new designs under battlefield conditions. Over time, this partnership provided the Soul Drinkers with access to weapons and equipment that were unavailable to most other Astartes chapters, contributing to their growing reputation for unconventional tactics and specialized capabilities. The chapter's armory gradually accumulated an impressive collection of rare and powerful weapons, many of which had been modified or enhanced by Mechanicus artificers working in collaboration with the Soul Drinkers' own tech marines. These included plasma weapons with improved cooling systems that allowed for sustained fire, bolt weapons modified to fire specialized ammunition types designed for specific enemy categories, and power weapons incorporating Archaeotech components that enhance their cutting power and durability. The chapter's tech marines developed expertise in maintaining and modifying these advanced systems, creating a technical knowledge base that would prove crucial in their later operations. The Soul Drinkers' early campaigns established patterns of operation that would define their tactical approach for centuries. They specialized in rapid deployment operations that emphasized speed and shock value over prolonged engagements, using their psychological warfare techniques to create maximum disruption among enemy forces before closing to melee range, where their close-quarters combat training provided decisive advantages. Their preferred operational method involved striking at enemy command structures and key personnel, using targeted assassinations and terror tactics to collapse opposition leadership before conventional forces could respond effectively. Their success in these operations earned recognition from Imperial command structures and led to increasingly challenging assignments that tested the chapter's capabilities and doctrine. The Soul Drinkers participated in several major campaigns during their early history, including the suppression of the Macharian Crusade's aftermath rebellions and counterinsurgency operations against chaos cults that had infiltrated Imperial worlds in the Segmentum Solar. These campaigns provided opportunities to refine their techniques and demonstrated the effectiveness of their psychological warfare approach against various enemy types. The chapter's organizational structure evolved to support their specialized combat doctrine, with individual squads receiving extensive cross-training in multiple combat roles to ensure tactical flexibility during operations. Soul Drinkers squads typically included specialists in demolitions, communications, and psychological operations, alongside traditional combat roles, creating self-sufficient units capable of operating independently for extended periods. This organizational approach proved particularly valuable during urban warfare operations, where traditional command structures might be disrupted by enemy action or environmental factors. Their recruiting practices incorporated psychological evaluation procedures designed to identify candidates with the mental resilience necessary for the chapter's demanding operational requirements. The transformation process for new recruits included specialized conditioning designed to enhance their ability to project intimidating presence during combat while maintaining psychological stability under extreme stress. This training produced Astartes who could function effectively in the high-stress environment of close-quarters combat, while utilizing psychological warfare techniques that might prove mentally taxing for less prepared individuals. The chapter's developing culture emphasized individual excellence within the context of squad-based operations, encouraging initiative and tactical creativity while maintaining the discipline necessary for coordinated military action. Soul Drinkers' battle brothers learned to adapt their approach based on enemy psychology and battlefield conditions, developing an intuitive understanding of how to exploit opponent weaknesses through combined physical and psychological pressure. This cultural emphasis on adaptability and psychological insight would prove crucial in shaping the chapter's identity and operational effectiveness throughout their service to the Imperium. The discovery that would fundamentally alter the Soul Drinkers' destiny occurred during the closing stages of the Lathe Sector campaign, when Captain Sarpedon's 4th Company encountered an ancient vault complex buried beneath the industrial ruins of Forge World Lathe 7. The vault had been sealed for millennia, its entrance hidden beneath layers of accumulated slag and debris from the planet's extensive manufacturing operations. Tech priest Magos Veneratus had detected anomalous energy readings emanating from the buried structure during routine geological surveys, readings that suggested the presence of archaeotech predating the current imperial settlement of the world. The excavation required careful coordination between the Soul Drinkers and the local Mechanicus contingent, as the vault's entrance mechanisms incorporated technology that predated standard imperial systems by several millennia. The outer seals bore inscriptions in Proto-Gothic script that referenced the Architect of Fate and contained warnings about the dangers of disturbing the vault's contents. These inscriptions troubled the accompanying tech priests, who recognized elements of the text as originating from the Dark Age of technology, a period when humanity's technological achievements had reached heights that the current Imperium could barely comprehend. The vault's interior chambers stretched deep into the planet's crust, their walls lined with stasis fields that had maintained perfect preservation conditions for thousands of years. The architecture displayed characteristics that were recognizably human in origin, yet incorporated design elements that seemed to anticipate the needs of post-human warriors. Weapon racks designed to accommodate power armor, training chambers with ceiling heights suitable for Astartes' physiology, and storage systems calibrated for equipment far more advanced than standard Imperial Guard issue, suggested that the vault's creators had possessed knowledge of the Adeptus Astartes project before its official implementation. Within the vault's deepest chamber, the Soul Drinkers discovered the artifact that would become their most treasured relic, a weapon of extraordinary craftsmanship that radiated psychic energy detectable even to non-psychers. The weapon resembled a traditional Astartes force weapon, but incorporated design elements that suggested far greater antiquity and sophistication. Its blade measured approximately 2 meters in length, forged from a material that appeared to be ceramite, but possessed properties that defied conventional analysis. The weapon's surface bore intricate engravings that seemed to shift and move when observed directly, creating patterns that suggested meaning without conveying specific information. The weapon's most distinctive feature was its ability to channel and amplify psychic energy in ways that exceeded the capabilities of standard force weapons. When handled by individuals with even minor psychic sensitivity, the weapon would emit a low humming sound and produce visible energy discharges that danced along its blade's edge. The energy patterns created by these discharges resembled neural networks or synaptic connections, leading the Soul Drinkers to theorize that the weapon somehow interfaced with the wielder's consciousness to enhance their combat effectiveness. Chief Librarian Varnica conducted extensive testing of the weapon's properties, discovering that it responded most strongly to individuals who possessed both psychic ability and combat training. The weapon seemed to enhance the wielder's spatial awareness and reaction time, while providing intuitive knowledge of opponent weaknesses and tactical opportunities. These effects extended beyond simple combat enhancement, as wielders reported experiencing heightened emotional states and increased aggression that persisted for hours after handling the weapon. The Soul Drinkers designated the weapon as the Soul Spear, a name that reflected both its physical appearance and its apparent ability to pierce the spiritual defenses of opponents. The weapon's blade could penetrate virtually any armor type, including the blessed ceramite of Astartes' power armor, while its psychic emanations could disrupt enemy concentration and morale at ranges far exceeding its physical reach. During field testing, the Soul Spear demonstrated the ability to cause psychological breakdown in enemy combatants who had not even engaged its wielder in direct combat. The discovery of the Soul Spear coincided with the chapter's acquisition of several other artifacts from the same vault complex. These included a collection of ancient imperial texts that predated the current Codex Astartes, ceremonial armor pieces that bore the symbols of unknown Astartes chapters, and weapons that incorporated technology similar to that found in the Soul Spear. The texts proved particularly valuable, as they contained tactical doctrines and training methods that complemented the Soul Drinkers' existing combat philosophy, while providing historical context for their operational approach. Among the most significant secondary artifacts was a collection of psychic focusing crystals that had been arranged in specific geometric patterns throughout the vault's chambers. These crystals possessed the ability to store and channel psychic energy, creating localized fields that enhanced the mental abilities of individuals within their influence. The Soul Drinkers' librarians discovered that these crystals could be incorporated into their existing equipment to create enhanced force weapons and psychic hoods that provided superior protection against enemy psychers. The chapter's Techmarines worked extensively with the Mechanicus contingent to understand the technological principles underlying the vault's artifacts. Their analysis revealed that the weapons and equipment incorporated design elements that suggested knowledge of Xenos technology, particularly devices that seemed to mirror the psychic manipulation capabilities of Eldar Wraithbone constructs. This discovery raised questions about the artifacts' origins and the circumstances under which they had been created, questions that would remain unanswered despite extensive research efforts. Chaplain Ictinos played a crucial role in integrating the newly discovered artifacts into the chapter's spiritual traditions and daily practices. As the Soul Drinkers' senior spiritual advisor, Ictinos possessed extensive knowledge of imperial religious doctrine and the proper procedures for blessing and consecrating new equipment. His initial assessment of the Soul Spear and associated artifacts focused on determining their compatibility with established imperial beliefs and identifying any potential spiritual dangers that might arise from their use. Ictinos developed elaborate blessing rituals specifically designed to purify the artifacts and ensure their alignment with the Emperor's will. These ceremonies incorporated elements from traditional imperial religious practices while adding chapter-specific components that reflected the Soul Drinkers' unique cultural identity. The rituals required extensive preparation and the participation of multiple battle brothers, creating communal experiences that strengthened the chapter's bonds while sanctifying their new equipment. The chaplain's approach to relic worship emphasized the artifact's role as tools for serving the emperor's will rather than objects of veneration in their own right. He taught that the Soul Spear and associated artifacts were gifts from the Emperor, provided to the chapter to enhance their ability to destroy his enemies and protect humanity from the threats that surrounded the Imperium. This theological framework allowed the Soul Drinkers to incorporate the artifacts into their operations without compromising their loyalty to Imperial doctrine. Under Ictinos' guidance, the chapter developed specific protocols for handling and maintaining their sacred relics. These procedures included regular purification ceremonies, detailed maintenance schedules, and strict guidelines governing who could access the artifacts and under what circumstances. The protocols ensured that the relics remained in optimal condition while preventing unauthorized use that might compromise their effectiveness or spiritual purity. The chapter's collection of sacred relics expanded significantly following the discovery of the Soul Spear, as the artifact's presence seemed to attract other items of similar power and significance. During subsequent campaigns, the soul drinkers encountered additional archaeotech devices that responded to the soul spear's psychic emanations, creating a network of interconnected artifacts that enhanced each other's capabilities. These discoveries included ancient cogitators that could process tactical information at superhuman speeds, armor components that provided enhanced protection against psychic attacks, and weapons that could channel the wielder's emotional state into devastating energy discharges. The chapter's armory became a repository for these accumulated treasures, with specialized storage chambers designed to contain the artifact's psychic emanations while preserving their functionality. The armory's layout incorporated sacred geometry principles that Ictinos had derived from his study of the vault's original configuration, creating an environment that enhanced the artifact's power while maintaining spiritual harmony within the chapter's fortress monastery. The soul spear's influence on the chapter's beliefs and practices began subtly, manifesting initially as minor modifications to existing traditions rather than dramatic theological changes. Battle brothers who had been exposed to the weapon's psychic emanations reported experiencing enhanced combat intuition and increased confidence in their abilities. These effects seemed beneficial at first, as they improved the chapter's combat effectiveness and strengthened the bonds between battle brothers who shared similar experiences. The weapon's psychological effects extended beyond individual enhancement to influence the chapter's collective mindset and cultural development. Battle brothers began to place increased emphasis on personal excellence and individual achievement, viewing these qualities as manifestations of the Emperor's favor rather than potential sources of pride or corruption. This shift in perspective encouraged competition between squads and companies while maintaining the cooperative spirit necessary for effective military operations. The Soul Spear's presence also influenced the chapter's approach to recruitment and training, as new initiates were evaluated based on their potential compatibility with the weapon's psychic emanations. Candidates who demonstrated strong psychic sensitivity or exceptional combat instincts received priority consideration, while those who showed adverse reactions to the weapon's influence were assigned to support roles or transferred to other chapters. This selection process gradually altered the chapter's genetic and psychological profile, creating a population of battle brothers who were increasingly attuned to the weapon's effects. The chapter's librarians noted changes in their own abilities following prolonged exposure to the soul spear and associated artifacts. Their psychic powers seemed to increase in strength and precision, while their ability to perceive enemy intentions and tactical opportunities improved significantly. These enhancements allowed the librarians to provide more effective support during combat operations, while contributing to the chapter's growing reputation for tactical innovation and psychological warfare expertise. The artifact's influence on the chapter's combat doctrine became apparent during the Badab War, when the Soul Drinker's unique capabilities and equipment provided decisive advantages in several key engagements. The Soul Spear's ability to penetrate enemy defenses and disrupt opponent morale proved particularly valuable during boarding actions and urban warfare operations, where traditional weapons might prove less effective against entrenched positions or heavily armored opponents. The chapter's growing collection of sacred relics required increasingly sophisticated maintenance and security procedures, as the artifacts combined psychic emanations created complex interaction effects that demanded careful monitoring and control. The Techmarines developed specialized diagnostic equipment capable of detecting fluctuations in the artifact's energy patterns, while the librarians created psychic wards designed to contain any potentially dangerous emanations that might arise from the relic's interaction with each other or with external psychic phenomena. The transformation of Sarpedon from a promising battle brother into the Soul Drinker's most influential librarian began during the chapter's 3rd century of service, when his latent psychic abilities first manifested during a boarding action against Orc raiders in the Cadian Gate region. The young Astartes had been serving as a tactical sergeant in the 4th Company's assault squads when he experienced his first documented psychic episode, a sudden burst of precognitive awareness that allowed him to anticipate enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. The incident occurred during close-quarters combat within the cramped corridors of an Orc cruiser, where Sarpedon's ability to predict enemy actions provided his squad with decisive tactical advantages that turned what should have been a costly engagement into a one-sided massacre. Chapter Master Gorgolian personally witnessed Sarpedon's psychic awakening during the boarding action's aftermath, when the young sergeant demonstrated his ability to sense the emotional states of nearby battle brothers and identify hidden enemy positions through psychic perception. Gorgolian recognized the significance of these abilities immediately, as the Soul Drinkers had always maintained a relatively small contingent of librarians compared to other chapters, making any new psyker a valuable addition to their ranks. The chapter master ordered Sarpedon's immediate transfer to the librarium for evaluation and training, beginning a process that would fundamentally alter both the warrior's destiny and the chapter's future direction. Chief Librarian Varnica conducted extensive testing of Sarpedon's psychic potential, discovering that the young Astartes possessed an unusual combination of telepathic sensitivity and precognitive ability that exceeded the capabilities of most newly awakened psykers. Sarpedon's mental defenses proved remarkably strong for an untrained individual, suggesting that his psychic abilities had been developing gradually over an extended period rather than manifesting suddenly during the boarding action. This gradual development had allowed him to unconsciously integrate his psychic awareness with his combat training, creating an intuitive fighting style that combined physical skill with supernatural perception. The training regimen that Varnica designed for Sarpedon incorporated elements from traditional librarian instruction, alongside specialized techniques that took advantage of his unique psychic profile. Standard librarian training emphasized the development of specific psychic disciplines through structured meditation and controlled practice, but Sarpedon's abilities seemed to function more effectively when integrated with physical activity and combat situations. Varnica adapted his teaching methods to accommodate this preference, creating training scenarios that combined psychic exercises with tactical simulations and combat drills. Sarpedon's rapid advancement through the librarian ranks reflected both his exceptional natural abilities and his dedication to mastering the complex disciplines required for effective psychic warfare. Within 5 years of beginning his training, he had achieved the rank of Lexicanum and demonstrated proficiency in multiple psychic disciplines, including biomancy, divination, and the telepathic techniques that would become his specialty. His ability to perceive enemy intentions and emotional states made him invaluable during interrogation procedures and strategic planning sessions, where his insights often revealed crucial information that conventional intelligence gathering had missed. The young librarian's relationship with the Soul Spear began during his advancement to Codicil rank, when Varnica permitted him to handle the sacred weapon as part of his training in artifact manipulation and psychic focusing techniques. Sarpedon's initial contact with the Soul Spear produced effects that exceeded anything previously observed, as the weapon's psychic emanations seemed to resonate with his mental patterns in ways that enhanced both his combat effectiveness and his psychic abilities. The weapon's blade would glow with increased intensity when Sarpedon wielded it, while its psychic emanations created complex interference patterns that disrupted enemy psykers and enhanced the mental clarity of nearby Soul Drinkers. Chapter Master Gorgolian observed Sarpedon's development with growing interest and concern, recognizing that the young librarian's abilities and philosophical inclinations were beginning to diverge from traditional Astartes doctrine in subtle but significant ways. Gorgolian himself embodied the classical virtues of imperial leadership, having risen through the ranks through demonstrated competence in conventional warfare and unwavering loyalty to established imperial doctrine. His command style emphasized discipline, hierarchy, and adherence to proven tactical principles, qualities that had served the Soul Drinkers well during their early campaigns, but which increasingly conflicted with Sarpedon's more flexible and intuitive approach to warfare. The command structure of the Soul Drinkers during this period reflected traditional Astartes organization, with Gorgolian maintaining direct oversight of all major tactical decisions, while delegating operational authority to his company captains and senior staff officers. The chapter's leadership council included the company captains, Chief Librarian Varnica, Chief Apothecary Carandin, and Master of the Forge Ligris, each of whom contributed specialized expertise to the chapter's strategic planning and operational execution. This hierarchical system had proven effective during the chapter's early campaigns, but it began to show strain as the Soul Drinkers encountered increasingly complex tactical situations that required rapid adaptation and unconventional solutions. Sarpedon's position within this command structure remained formally subordinate to Varnica and the company captains, but his growing reputation for tactical innovation and his unique insights into enemy psychology gradually earned him influence that exceeded his official rank. Battle brothers from across the chapter began seeking his counsel on tactical matters, while company commanders increasingly requested his participation in planning sessions and combat operations. This informal authority created tension within the chapter's traditional hierarchy, as some senior officers viewed Sarpedon's growing influence as a challenge to established command protocols. The philosophical differences between Sarpedon and the chapter's traditional leadership became apparent during the Soul Drinkers' participation in the Macharian Crusade's aftermath operations, when the chapter was assigned to suppress rebellions on worlds that had been liberated during the original campaign. The conventional approach to these operations emphasized overwhelming force and rapid suppression of resistance, but Sarpedon argued for more nuanced tactics that took into account the psychological and social factors driving the rebellions. His proposals included targeted strikes against rebel leadership, psychological warfare campaigns designed to undermine enemy morale, and negotiation attempts with moderate rebel factions who might be willing to return to Imperial compliance. Gorgolian initially rejected these proposals as unnecessarily complex and potentially dangerous, arguing that the chapter's duty was to eliminate the Emperor's enemies rather than attempt to understand their motivations or negotiate with traitors. The chapter master's position reflected orthodox imperial doctrine, which emphasized the absolute nature of imperial authority and the futility of attempting to reason with those who had rejected the Emperor's rule. This doctrinal rigidity had served the Imperium well for millennia, but Sarpedon increasingly viewed it as a limitation that prevented the Soul Drinkers from achieving maximum effectiveness in their operations. The young librarian's arguments for tactical flexibility and psychological insight gradually gained support among the chapter's younger officers and battle brothers, who had observed the effectiveness of his unconventional approaches during previous campaigns. These supporters included Captain Drio of the 6th Company, who had witnessed Sarpedon's ability to predict enemy movements during urban warfare operations, and Sergeant Grievous of the 1st Company, whose assault squads had benefited from Sarpedon's tactical innovations during boarding actions against pirate vessels. This growing support base provided Sarpedon with a platform for advancing his ideas while maintaining the appearance of loyalty to established command structures. Sarpedon's questioning of imperial doctrine extended beyond tactical considerations to encompass broader philosophical questions about the nature of the Imperium and the Astartes' role within it. He began to argue that the Space Marines' superhuman abilities and extended lifespans gave them perspectives that exceeded those of normal humans, including the Imperial officials who nominally commanded them. This perspective led him to question whether blind obedience to imperial authority was always the most effective way to serve the Emperor's will, particularly when imperial officials made decisions based on incomplete information or political considerations rather than tactical necessity. These philosophical inquiries initially remained within acceptable bounds of intellectual discourse, as Sarpedon framed his questions in terms of tactical effectiveness rather than fundamental challenges to imperial authority. He argued that the Soul Drinkers could serve the Emperor more effectively by exercising independent judgment in tactical situations rather than adhering rigidly to orders that might be based on outdated or inaccurate intelligence. This position found support among battle brothers, who had experienced the frustration of following orders that seemed tactically unsound or strategically counterproductive. The pivotal moment in Sarpedon's development came during the chapter's involvement in the suppression of the Cadian 47th Regiment's mutiny, when Imperial Guard forces on the world of Stratix Lumini had refused orders to advance against a heavily fortified Chaos cult stronghold. The regimental commander had deemed the assault suicidal and had requested additional artillery support before proceeding, but Sector Command had insisted on immediate action to prevent the cult from completing a ritual that intelligence reports suggested would summon demonic reinforcements. The Soul Drinkers were deployed to enforce Imperial authority and ensure that the assault proceeded as ordered. Sarpedon's psychic abilities allowed him to perceive the genuine fear and desperation among the Guard troops, as well as the fanatical determination of the cult members they were ordered to attack. His tactical analysis confirmed the regimental commander's assessment that a direct assault would result in massive casualties for minimal strategic gain, while his psychic senses detected no evidence of the imminent demonic summoning that had supposedly justified the urgent attack order. When he presented this information to Gorgolian, the chapter master faced a difficult choice between supporting Imperial command authority and accepting Sarpedon's assessment of the tactical situation. The resolution of this crisis demonstrated the growing influence of Sarpedon's tactical philosophy within the chapter's decision-making processes. Gorgolian ultimately chose to delay the assault pending further intelligence gathering, a decision that contradicted direct orders from Sector Command, but which proved tactically sound when subsequent reconnaissance revealed that the cult's ritual preparations were far less advanced than initial reports had indicated. The successful resolution of the situation through careful planning and psychological warfare validated Sarpedon's approach, while raising questions about the reliability of Imperial intelligence and the wisdom of blind obedience to superior authority. The aftermath of the Stratix Lumini incident marked a turning point in Sarpedon's relationship with the chapter's command structure and his own understanding of his role within the Soul Drinkers. The young librarian's success in challenging established tactical doctrine had demonstrated the value of independent thinking and psychological insight, but it had also created precedents that would prove difficult to contain within traditional command hierarchies. Battle brothers throughout the chapter began to view Sarpedon as a source of tactical innovation and strategic wisdom, while some senior officers worried that his growing influence might undermine the discipline and unity that had made the Soul Drinkers effective. Sarpedon's advancement to the rank of epistolary coincided with his appointment as the chapter's primary specialist in psychological warfare and enemy analysis, roles that formalized his influence over tactical planning while maintaining his position within the established command structure. These appointments reflected Gorgolian's recognition of Sarpedon's unique abilities, while attempting to channel his influence in ways that supported rather than challenged traditional authority. The arrangement proved effective in the short term, as it allowed Sarpedon to contribute his insights to the chapter's operations while maintaining the appearance of hierarchical discipline. The young librarian's tactical innovations during this period included the development of specialized psychological warfare techniques that combined traditional Astartes' shock tactics with carefully calculated psychological pressure designed to break enemy morale before physical combat commenced. These techniques proved particularly effective against human opponents, as Sarpedon's telepathic abilities allowed him to identify psychological vulnerabilities and exploit them through targeted intimidation and fear-inducing tactics. The success of these methods enhanced the chapter's reputation for psychological warfare while validating Sarpedon's arguments for tactical flexibility and innovation. The discovery of the Adeptus Mechanicus plot that would forever alter the Soul Drinkers' relationship with the Imperium began with seemingly routine maintenance procedures aboard their fortress monastery, the Brokenback. Tekmagos Kabatov had arrived with the regular Mechanicus contingent assigned to perform sacred rituals on the ship's ancient machine spirits, carrying credentials that identified him as a specialist in archaeotech preservation and relic maintenance. His presence initially raised no suspicions among the chapter's leadership, as the Soul Drinkers had maintained positive relationships with various Mechanicus Forge worlds throughout their history, particularly those involved in weapons research and development. Kabatov's official mission involved conducting routine maintenance on the chapter's collection of ancient artifacts, including the Soul Spear and the various archaeotech devices that had been discovered alongside it in the vault complex beneath Lathe 7. The Tech Magos possessed extensive documentation regarding the proper care and preservation of Dark Age technology, knowledge that the Soul Drinkers' own Techmarines lacked despite their considerable expertise in standard Imperial equipment. His arrival coincided with reports of minor fluctuations in the Soul Spear's psychic emanations, anomalies that suggested the weapon might require specialized attention to maintain its effectiveness. The Tech Magos established his operations within the Brokenback Sacred Armory, where the chapter's most precious relics were stored under the watchful protection of specially selected battle brothers and servo skulls equipped with advanced detection equipment. Kabatov's work appeared methodical and professional, involving detailed scans of each artifact's composition and energy patterns, followed by careful cleaning and recalibration procedures that seemed designed to optimize their performance. His servo skull attendants carried specialized equipment that the Soul Drinkers had never seen before, devices that could analyze psychic emanations and map the complex energy fields generated by the ancient weapons. Sarpedon's first suspicions arose during his routine inspection of the armory's security systems, when his psychic senses detected subtle anomalies in the emotional patterns of the Tech Magos and his attendants. The librarian's telepathic abilities had grown increasingly sensitive following his extended exposure to the Soul Spear, allowing him to perceive the mental states of individuals even when they attempted to conceal their true intentions. Kabatov's surface thoughts projected appropriate reverence for the sacred artifacts and dedication to his maintenance duties, but underlying these conscious thoughts, Sarpedon detected currents of excitement and anticipation that seemed inconsistent with routine maintenance work. The librarian's investigation into Kabatov's activities required careful discretion, as direct challenges to Mechanicus authority could create diplomatic complications that might damage the chapter's relationships with crucial allies. Sarpedon began monitoring the Tech Magos through passive psychic observation, using his abilities to track the man's movements and emotional states without alerting him to the surveillance. This covert observation revealed that Kabatov spent considerably more time examining the Soul Spear than his maintenance schedule required, conducting detailed scans that seemed designed to map the weapon's internal structure rather than identify potential maintenance issues. The Tech Magos' true intentions became apparent when Sarpedon detected him attempting to create detailed technical schematics of the Soul Spear's construction, using specialized scanning equipment that had been concealed within his maintenance tools. The scans were far more comprehensive than anything required for preservation work, capturing information about the weapon's psychic focusing mechanisms, energy distribution systems, and the unique materials used in its construction. Kabatov's servo skulls transmitted this data to hidden storage devices that had been integrated into their standard equipment, creating a comprehensive technical profile of the Soul Drinker's most sacred relic. Further investigation revealed that Kabatov had been conducting similar scans of the other artifacts in the chapter's collection, focusing particularly on items that displayed unusual psychic properties or incorporated unknown technological principles. His work appeared to be part of a systematic effort to catalog and analyze the Soul Drinker's entire collection of archaeotech, creating a database that would allow the Mechanicus to understand and potentially replicate the artifact's capabilities. The scope of this intelligence-gathering operation suggested planning and coordination that extended far beyond a single Tech Magos' individual initiative. Sarpedon's psychic probes into Kabatov's deeper thoughts revealed fragments of communication with other Mechanicus officials, including references to Forge worlds that specialized in reverse engineering ancient technology and research facilities dedicated to understanding Dark Age artifacts. The Tech Magos had received specific instructions to prioritize the soul spear in his analysis, with particular emphasis on understanding the weapon's psychic amplification properties and the methods used to integrate its various technological components. These instructions suggested that the Mechanicus possessed prior knowledge of the weapon's capabilities and had specifically targeted it for acquisition or replication. The conspiracy's true scope became clear when Sarpedon discovered evidence of Kabatov's plan to physically remove the soul spear from the broken back during the conclusion of his maintenance mission. The Tech-Magos had prepared specialized containment equipment designed to suppress the weapon's psychic emanations during transport, while his servo-skulls had been modified with concealed weapon systems that could disable the armory's security systems and neutralize any guards who might attempt to interfere with the theft. The plan's sophistication suggested extensive preparation and coordination with external support networks that could facilitate the weapon's removal from Soul Drinker's territory. Chapter Master Gorgolian's response to Sarpedon's discovery reflected the traditional Imperial approach to dealing with suspected treachery within the Imperium's own institutions. The Chapter Master ordered the immediate detention of Kabatov and his attendants, followed by formal interrogation procedures designed to determine the full extent of the conspiracy and identify any additional participants who might pose threats to the chapter's security. Gorgolian's military background and decades of experience in Imperial service had taught him to trust established procedures and institutional authority, making him reluctant to believe that the conspiracy might extend beyond a few rogue individuals. The interrogation of Tech-Magos Kabatov revealed information that challenged fundamental assumptions about the Mechanicus's relationship with the Soul Drinkers and the broader Imperial command structure. Under psychic interrogation conducted by Sarpedon, the Tech-Magos disclosed that his mission had been authorized by high-ranking officials within the Adeptus Mechanicus hierarchy, including fabricator generals from multiple Forge worlds who had coordinated their efforts to acquire the Soul Drinkers' Archaeotech collection. The conspiracy involved not only the theft of the artifacts, but also plans to study their construction methods and potentially mass-produce weapons based on their designs. The revelation that respected Imperial institutions were actively plotting against the Soul Drinkers created a crisis of confidence within the chapter's leadership that extended far beyond the immediate security concerns raised by Kabatov's presence. The conspiracy suggested that the Mechanicus viewed the Soul Drinkers as a source of valuable technology rather than as allies deserving of respect and cooperation, while the involvement of multiple Forge worlds indicated that the plot enjoyed widespread support within the Adeptus Mechanicus hierarchy. This institutional betrayal forced the chapter's leadership to question their assumptions about Imperial loyalty and the trustworthiness of their supposed allies. Sarpedon's investigation into the conspiracy's broader implications revealed disturbing patterns of Imperial behavior that extended beyond the immediate threat posed by Kabatov's mission. The librarian's analysis of recent Imperial communications and supply requests suggested that other Imperial institutions had been monitoring the Soul Drinkers' activities with unusual interest, focusing particularly on their use of archaeotech and their unconventional tactical approaches. Administratum officials had requested detailed reports on the chapter's equipment and operational methods, while Inquisition representatives had made subtle inquiries about the origins of the Soul Drinkers' artifacts and their effects on the chapter's battle brothers. The pattern of institutional surveillance and interest suggested that the Soul Drinkers had become subjects of investigation rather than trusted servants of the Emperor, with various Imperial organizations seeking to understand and potentially exploit their unique capabilities. This realization forced Sarpedon to confront the possibility that the chapter's loyalty to Imperial authority might not be reciprocated by the institutions they served, raising fundamental questions about the nature of their relationship with the Imperium and their obligations to Imperial command structures that viewed them with suspicion rather than respect. Chapter Master Gorgolian's death occurred during the climactic confrontation with Kabatov's extraction team, when the Tech Magos' hidden allies attempted to retrieve both him and the stolen technical data through a coordinated assault on the Brokenback's armory section. The attack began with systematic sabotage of the fortress monastery's internal security systems, followed by the deployment of heavily armed servo skulls and combat servitors that had been smuggled aboard the vessel within seemingly innocent maintenance equipment. The assault team's objective was to create sufficient chaos to allow Kabatov's escape while simultaneously recovering the technical data he had gathered during his infiltration mission. The battle within the Brokenback's corridors demonstrated the extent of the conspiracy's preparation and resources, as the attacking forces possessed detailed knowledge of the fortress monastery's layout and security procedures. The combat servitors had been specifically programmed to neutralize Soul Drinker's battle brothers, using weapons and tactics designed to exploit weaknesses in Astartes' armor and combat doctrine. Their coordinated assault created multiple breaches in the ship's internal defenses while targeting key personnel who might organize effective resistance to their extraction operation. Gorgolian led the chapter's response to the assault personally, wielding his master-crafted power sword and storm bolter as he fought through the compromised sections of the fortress monastery to reach the armory where Kabatov and his remaining allies had barricaded themselves. The chapter master's combat skills and tactical experience allowed him to cut through the attacking servitors with devastating efficiency, but the enemy's knowledge of Astartes' capabilities enabled them to channel his advance into prepared kill zones, where concentrated firepower could be brought to bear against even superhuman opponents. The final confrontation occurred within the armory itself, where Kabatov had activated a powerful psychic disruption field that interfered with the Soul Spear's emanations, while creating a localized warp disturbance that threatened to tear open a rift in reality. The Tech Magos had revealed cybernetic modifications that exceeded standard Mechanicus augmentation, including weapon systems and defensive measures that suggested access to forbidden archaeotech that the Adeptus Mechanicus had officially banned from use. His enhanced capabilities allowed him to engage Gorgolian in direct combat despite the vast difference in their physical abilities and combat training. Gorgolian's death resulted from a combination of factors that reflected both the conspiracy's sophistication and the chapter master's commitment to protecting his chapter's sacred relics. The psychic disruption field created by Kabatov's equipment interfered with the chapter master's spatial awareness and reaction time, while the confined space of the armory prevented him from utilizing his preferred tactical approaches. The Tech Magos' cybernetic enhancements included defensive systems that could absorb and redirect the energy from power weapon strikes, forcing Gorgolian into a prolonged engagement that favored his opponent's technological advantages over his superior combat skills. The chapter master's final moments demonstrated the courage and dedication that had defined his leadership throughout his service to the Soul Drinkers. Despite suffering multiple wounds from Kabatov's integrated weapon systems, Gorgolian continued fighting until he had destroyed the psychic disruption equipment and neutralized the immediate threat to the chapter's artifacts. His sacrifice prevented the theft of the Soul Spear and the other sacred relics, but the cost of this victory left the chapter without its primary leader at a crucial moment in their history. Sarpedon's response to Gorgolian's death and the broader implications of the conspiracy marked the beginning of his transformation from a questioning subordinate into a revolutionary leader who would fundamentally alter the Soul Drinker's relationship with imperial authority. The librarian's investigation had revealed that the conspiracy extended far beyond Kabatov's individual actions, involving multiple imperial institutions that viewed the chapter as a resource to be exploited rather than as loyal servants deserving of respect and protection. This revelation forced him to confront the possibility that the Imperium's institutional structures had become corrupted by competing interests and political considerations that prioritized organizational advantage over the Emperor's true will. The evidence gathered during the investigation painted a disturbing picture of imperial governance that contradicted the idealized vision of unified purpose and shared dedication that had sustained the soul drinkers throughout their service. The Mechanicus' willingness to steal from their supposed allies through administratum surveillance of loyal Astartes chapters and the Inquisition's suspicious inquiries suggested that the Imperium had become a collection of competing bureaucracies rather than a unified force dedicated to humanity's protection. This systemic corruption posed threats to the chapter's mission and survival that could not be addressed through traditional channels or conventional responses. Sarpedon's analysis of the conspiracy's implications led him to conclude that the soul drinkers could no longer rely on imperial institutions to provide the support and protection that loyal service traditionally earned. The chapter's unique capabilities and sacred artifacts made them valuable targets for exploitation by organizations that prioritized their own interests over the broader imperial mission, while their adherence to traditional command structures left them vulnerable to manipulation and betrayal by corrupt officials. This vulnerability could only be addressed through fundamental changes in the chapter's relationship with imperial authority and their approach to fulfilling their obligations to the emperor. The first major break from imperial protocol occurred when Sarpedon convinced the chapter's surviving leadership to conceal the true circumstances of Gorgolian's death and the Mechanicus conspiracy from imperial authorities. The official report submitted to Sector Command described the chapter master's death as the result of a training accident involving experimental equipment, while the fate of Kabatov and his team was attributed to a reactor malfunction that had destroyed the section of the fortress monastery where they had been working. These deceptions protected the chapter from potential retaliation by Mechanicus allies while preserving their operational freedom to investigate and respond to similar threats. The decision to deceive imperial authorities represented a fundamental shift in the soul drinkers' relationship with the institutional structures that had previously commanded their loyalty and obedience. By choosing to protect their own interests rather than report the conspiracy through official channels, the chapter had begun the process of separating themselves from the imperial command structure and assuming responsibility for their own security and mission priorities. This separation would prove irreversible, as each subsequent deception and independent action would further distance them from the institutional loyalty that had previously defined their identity and purpose. The first signs of Sarpedon's physical transformation manifested approximately 6 months after Gorgolian's death, when the newly appointed chapter master began experiencing severe pain in his lower spine and legs during routine combat training exercises. The symptoms initially appeared to be standard injuries resulting from the intense physical demands of Astartes' conditioning, but Chief Apothecary Carandin's medical examinations revealed abnormalities in Sarpedon's bone structure and muscular development that defied conventional explanation. The librarian's femur and tibia bones were elongating at an accelerated rate, while new bone formations were developing along his spine and pelvis in patterns that suggested the emergence of additional limb structures. The transformation process proved both agonizing and gradual, unfolding over several months as Sarpedon's body underwent fundamental restructuring that challenged the limits of Astartes' physiology. His existing legs began to split and multiply, with new skeletal structures forming beneath his skin, while his nervous system adapted to accommodate the additional appendages. The process involved the generation of entirely new muscle groups, circulatory pathways, and neural connections that had to integrate with his existing Astartes enhancements without compromising his combat effectiveness or mental stability. Carandin's detailed analysis of the transformation revealed that the changes were occurring at the genetic level, with Sarpedon's gene seed expressing previously dormant sequences that appeared to have been activated by prolonged exposure to the soul spear's psychic emanations. The weapon's influence had somehow triggered latent mutations within the librarian's genetic structure, mutations that seemed to follow specific patterns rather than the random corruption typically associated with chaos influence. The transformation appeared to be following a predetermined template, as if the gene seed contained instructions for these changes that had remained inactive until exposed to the appropriate psychic stimuli. The emergence of Sarpedon's spider-like legs occurred in stages, with each new appendage developing from small protrusions that gradually extended and strengthened until they could support his enhanced body weight. The new limbs possessed the same enhanced strength and durability as his original Astartes physiology, but their articulation and range of motion exceeded anything possible with standard human anatomy. The additional legs provided him with unprecedented stability and mobility, allowing him to move across vertical surfaces and navigate complex terrain with an agility that surpassed even the enhanced capabilities of unmodified space marines. The psychological impact of these physical changes proved as significant as their tactical advantages, as Sarpedon struggled to maintain his sense of identity while adapting to his transformed body. The process of learning to coordinate 8 legs required extensive retraining of his motor functions and spatial awareness, while the visual impact of his appearance created immediate challenges in his interactions with other battle brothers. Some members of the chapter viewed his transformation with fascination and reverence, interpreting the changes as evidence of the Emperor's favor or the Soul Spear's blessing, while others experienced instinctive revulsion or fear when confronted with their leader's altered form. The chapter's initial response to Sarpedon's mutation reflected the complex theological and practical challenges posed by physical transformation within the rigid doctrinal framework of imperial belief. Traditional imperial doctrine classified any deviation from standard human form as potential corruption, requiring immediate investigation and often resulting in purification through death or exile. However, the Soul Drinkers' unique relationship with their sacred artifacts and their growing independence from imperial oversight created space for alternative interpretations of Sarpedon's condition that emphasized divine blessing rather than demonic corruption. Chaplain Ictinos played a crucial role in developing the theological framework that allowed the chapter to accept Sarpedon's transformation without compromising their spiritual integrity or loyalty to the Emperor. The chaplain's extensive knowledge of imperial religious doctrine and his intimate familiarity with the Soul Spear's properties enabled him to construct arguments that presented the mutation as a manifestation of the Emperor's will rather than evidence of chaos corruption. Ictinos argued that the transformation represented the Emperor's response to the chapter's faithful service and their dedication to protecting humanity from its enemies. The chaplain's theological interpretation emphasized the functional advantages provided by Sarpedon's new form, arguing that the Emperor had granted these enhancements to better equip the chapter's leader for the challenges they faced. The additional limbs improved Sarpedon's combat effectiveness and tactical mobility, while his enhanced connection to the Soul Spear allowed him to channel its power more effectively than any previous wielder. These practical benefits suggested divine purpose rather than random corruption, supporting the interpretation that the transformation represented blessing rather than curse. The chapter's acceptance of this theological framework required significant adjustments to their understanding of purity and corruption, as traditional imperial doctrine provided little guidance for evaluating mutations that enhanced rather than degraded combat effectiveness. The Soul Drinkers began to develop their own criteria for distinguishing between beneficial and harmful changes, focusing on the functional impact of mutations rather than their deviation from standard human form. This approach allowed them to embrace transformations that improved their ability to serve the Emperor while maintaining vigilance against changes that might compromise their loyalty or effectiveness. The discovery that Sarpedon's transformation was linked to the chapter's gene seed corruption emerged through careful analysis of genetic samples taken from battle brothers throughout the chapter's companies. Apothecary Carandin's investigation revealed that similar genetic anomalies existed within the gene seed of other Soul Drinkers, though most remained dormant and inactive. The mutations appeared to be concentrated among battle brothers who had served in close proximity to the Soul Spear, or who had participated in extended combat operations where the weapon's psychic emanations were particularly intense. The pattern of genetic corruption suggested that the soul spear's influence had been gradually altering the chapter's gene seed over decades of exposure, introducing mutations that lay dormant until triggered by specific conditions or psychic stimuli. The weapon's psychic emanations seemed to activate latent genetic sequences that had been incorporated into the gene seed during its original creation, sequences that might have been intended to provide adaptive advantages under extreme circumstances. The gradual nature of this corruption explained why the changes had gone undetected during routine medical examinations and gene seed monitoring procedures. Further investigation revealed that the mutations were not random, but followed specific patterns that suggested intelligent design rather than chaotic corruption. The genetic changes appeared to be optimized for combat effectiveness and survival in hostile environments, providing enhancements that complemented rather than replaced existing Astartes capabilities. The mutations included improvements to sensory perception, enhanced reflexes, and modified bone and muscle structures that increased strength and agility while maintaining the durability and resilience that define space marine physiology. The chapter's response to these discoveries involved extensive debate among the leadership regarding the implications of their genetic corruption and the appropriate measures for managing its effects. Some officers argued for immediate intervention to halt the mutation process and prevent further changes, while others advocated for allowing the transformations to continue under careful monitoring and control. The debate reflected deeper philosophical questions about the nature of purity and the acceptable limits of deviation from standard Astartes form. Sarpedon's position as chapter master gave him significant influence over these discussions, and his personal experience with the transformation process shaped his arguments in favor of embracing rather than resisting the changes. The librarian argued that the mutations represented evolutionary adaptation rather than corruption, providing the chapter with advantages that would enhance their effectiveness in combat against the Imperium's enemies. His enhanced abilities and improved connection to the Soul Spear demonstrated the practical benefits of accepting the transformation, while his maintained loyalty and mental stability proved that the changes did not compromise his dedication to the Emperor's service. The chapter's decision to rationalize their mutations as gifts rather than corruption required significant departures from established imperial doctrine regarding genetic purity and the sanctity of the human form. Traditional imperial teaching emphasized the perfection of the human template as created by the Emperor, viewing any deviation from this standard as potential evidence of chaos corruption or Xeno's influence. The Soul Drinker's alternative interpretation challenged these fundamental assumptions, arguing that the Emperor's will could manifest through beneficial mutations that enhanced rather than degraded human capabilities. This theological reinterpretation created a framework that allowed the chapter to embrace their transformations while maintaining their sense of righteousness and divine purpose. The Soul Drinkers began to view their mutations as evidence of the Emperor's special favor, interpreting their enhanced abilities as tools provided by the divine will to better serve humanity's needs. This perspective enabled them to accept physical changes that would have been condemned as corruption by orthodox imperial doctrine, while maintaining their commitment to the Emperor's service and their hatred of humanity's enemies. The practical implementation of this new theological framework required extensive modifications to the chapter's training procedures, equipment specifications, and operational protocols. Sarpedon's transformed physiology necessitated custom armor and weapons that could accommodate his additional limbs, while maintaining the protection and functionality required for Astartes' combat operations. The chapter's tech marines worked closely with him to develop specialized equipment that enhanced rather than hindered his new capabilities, creating armor systems that provided full protection while allowing unrestricted movement of all 8 legs. The psychological impact of the mutations extended beyond individual battle brothers to affect the chapter's collective identity and their relationships with other imperial forces. The visible nature of the transformations made it impossible to conceal the changes from external observers, creating immediate challenges when the Soul Drinkers interacted with other Astartes chapters, Imperial Guard units, or civilian populations. The chapter's altered appearance generated suspicion and fear among Imperial forces who had been trained to view physical deviation as evidence of corruption or heresy. These external reactions forced the Soul Drinkers to develop strategies for managing their interactions with other Imperial forces while maintaining their operational effectiveness and mission focus. The chapter began to limit their joint operations with other military units, preferring to conduct independent campaigns where their appearance would not create diplomatic complications or undermine mission effectiveness. This isolation reinforced their growing separation from mainstream Imperial military culture while strengthening their internal bonds and shared identity as a unique force serving the Emperor's will. The mutations also affected the chapter's recruitment and training procedures, as new initiates had to be prepared for the possibility of physical transformation during their service. The Soul Drinkers began to select candidates based not only on their physical and mental capabilities, but also on their psychological flexibility and ability to adapt to radical changes in their appearance and abilities. This selection process gradually altered the chapter's demographic profile, creating a population of battle brothers who were more accepting of change and less bound by traditional concepts of purity and normalcy. The chapter's growing acceptance of mutation as a positive force created internal tensions between battle brothers who embraced the transformations and those who remained uncomfortable with the departures from standard Astartes form. These tensions manifested in subtle ways, including segregation during training exercises, differences in equipment preferences, and varying levels of enthusiasm for missions that involved close contact with the Soul Spear. The chapter's leadership worked to manage these divisions while maintaining unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. The influence of the mutations on the chapter's combat doctrine became apparent during their subsequent campaigns, as transformed battle brothers demonstrated capabilities that exceeded standard Astartes performance in specific tactical situations. Sarpedon's enhanced mobility and spatial awareness proved particularly valuable during urban warfare operations and boarding actions, where his ability to navigate complex three-dimensional environments provided significant tactical advantages. Other battle brothers who had undergone less dramatic transformations showed improvements in sensory perception, reaction time, and combat endurance that enhanced their effectiveness in various combat roles. These tactical advantages validated the chapter's decision to embrace their mutations while demonstrating the practical benefits of their theological reinterpretation. The enhanced capabilities provided by the transformations allowed the Soul Drinkers to undertake missions and achieve objectives that would have been impossible for unmodified Astartes, supporting their argument that the mutations represented divine blessing rather than corruption. The success of these operations reinforced the chapter's confidence in their chosen path, while providing evidence that their departures from Imperial doctrine were justified by their results. The long-term implications of the chapter's acceptance of mutation extended beyond immediate tactical considerations to encompass fundamental questions about their future development and their relationship with the broader Imperium. The Soul Drinkers' willingness to embrace physical transformation set them apart from other Astartes chapters and created precedents that would influence their subsequent decisions regarding loyalty, independence, and their obligations to Imperial authority. The mutations had become both a source of strength and a mark of their separation from the orthodox Imperial military culture that had previously defined their identity and purpose. The seeds of civil war within the Soul Drinkers had been growing throughout Sarpedon's transformation period, as battle brothers across the chapter struggled to reconcile their loyalty to Imperial doctrine with their acceptance of the mutations that were spreading through their ranks. The theological framework developed by Chaplain Ictinos had provided justification for embracing the changes, but not all members of the chapter found these arguments convincing or spiritually satisfying. A significant faction of battle brothers, led by Captain Caradin of the 3rd Company, maintained that the mutations represented corruption that threatened the chapter's spiritual purity and their standing within the broader Imperium. Captain Carradine embodied the traditional values that had defined the Soul Drinkers during their early centuries of service, having risen through the ranks during the chapter's most successful campaigns against Orc raiders and Chaos cultists in the Segmentum Solar. His service record included commendations for tactical excellence and unwavering loyalty to Imperial doctrine, qualities that had earned him the respect of battle brothers throughout the chapter. Carradine's leadership style emphasized discipline, adherence to established protocols, and maintenance of the chapter's reputation within Imperial military circles, perspectives that put him at odds with Sarpedon's increasingly independent approach to command decisions. The Third Company captain's opposition to the mutations stemmed from both theological concerns and practical considerations about the chapter's future relationship with Imperial authorities. Carradine argued that the physical transformations would inevitably attract investigation from the Inquisition and other Imperial oversight bodies, potentially resulting in the chapter's classification as renegade or heretical. His analysis of Imperial precedents suggested that chapters displaying significant genetic deviation were typically subjected to intensive scrutiny that often led to censure, dissolution, or outright declaration of traitors extremis. The captain's concerns gained support among battle brothers who shared his commitment to traditional Imperial values and his skepticism about the theological justifications for accepting mutation. These loyalists included veterans from the chapter's early campaigns who had served under Chapter Master Gorgolian and maintained strong connections to the orthodox Imperial military culture that had shaped their initial training and indoctrination. Their opposition to the mutations reflected deeper concerns about the chapter's drift away from established Imperial doctrine and their growing isolation from other Astartes chapters. The theological debate between Carradine's faction and Sarpedon's supporters intensified as more battle brothers began displaying signs of physical transformation, creating visible divisions within the chapter that affected unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. The Loyalist faction argued that the mutations represented temptation that tested the chapter's spiritual strength, requiring resistance and purification rather than acceptance and celebration. They maintained that true loyalty to the Emperor demanded adherence to the human form as the divine template, viewing any deviation from this standard as evidence of spiritual weakness or corruption. Sarpedon's response to this growing opposition reflected his evolving understanding of leadership and his commitment to the path the chapter had chosen following the Mechanicus conspiracy. The chapter master argued that the mutations provided tactical advantages that enhanced the Soul Drinker's ability to serve the Emperor's will, while the Loyalists' adherence to traditional doctrine represented inflexibility that would ultimately compromise their effectiveness against the Imperium's enemies. His position emphasized practical results over theoretical purity, arguing that the Emperor valued service and achievement more than conformity to arbitrary standards of physical appearance. The philosophical divide between these positions reflected fundamental differences in how the two factions interpreted the Emperor's will and the nature of loyalty within the Imperial system. Carradine's supporters viewed loyalty as obedience to established authority and adherence to proven doctrine, while Sarpedon's faction emphasized independent judgment and adaptation to changing circumstances. These competing interpretations of duty and service created irreconcilable differences that could not be resolved through discussion or compromise. The first open confrontation between the factions occurred during a chapter assembly called to address reports of Inquisition interest in the Soul Drinker's activities and appearance. Imperial intelligence networks had begun circulating descriptions of the chapter's mutations, while several Forge Worlds had submitted formal complaints about the loss of their archaeological expedition to the Broken Back. Carradine used this assembly to present his case for voluntary submission to Imperial investigation, arguing that cooperation with Imperial authorities would demonstrate the chapter's loyalty and potentially resolve any suspicions about their genetic integrity. Sarpedon's rejection of this proposal marked the point where philosophical differences became irreconcilable opposition, as the chapter master declared that submission to imperial investigation would result in the chapter's destruction regardless of their actual loyalty or spiritual purity. His analysis of imperial precedents supported this conclusion, as chapters that had submitted to genetic investigation typically faced dissolution even when no evidence of corruption was discovered. The Inquisition's approach to genetic deviation emphasized prevention over investigation, making survival dependent on avoiding scrutiny rather than proving innocence. The debate during this assembly revealed the extent of the divisions within the chapter, as battle brothers from across the companies voiced support for either Caridin's position or Sarpedon's alternative. The Loyalist faction included approximately 40% of the chapter's strength, concentrated primarily in the 3rd, 7th, and 9th companies, while Sarpedon's supporters dominated the 1st, 4th, and 6th companies. The remaining companies were divided, with individual squads and battle brothers choosing sides based on their personal relationships, theological convictions, and tactical assessments of the chapter's situation. The formal split occurred when Caridin declared that he could no longer serve under Sarpedon's command while maintaining his oath of loyalty to the Emperor, effectively challenging the chapter master's authority and creating a crisis of legitimacy within the chapter's command structure. The captain's position was that Sarpedon's mutations and rejection of imperial oversight constituted de facto rebellion against imperial authority, making continued service under his command tantamount to treason. This declaration forced battle brothers throughout the chapter to choose between their loyalty to their transformed leader and their allegiance to traditional imperial doctrine. Sarpedon's response to this challenge demonstrated both his commitment to maintaining chapter unity and his recognition that compromise was no longer possible. The chapter master offered Caridin and his supporters the opportunity to transfer to other chapters or Imperial Guard units, allowing them to maintain their loyalty to imperial authority without directly opposing their former battle brothers. However, Caridin rejected this offer, arguing that his oath required him to prevent the chapter's fall into heresy rather than simply avoiding participation in it. The captain's refusal to accept transfer or stand down from his opposition created a situation where armed conflict became inevitable, as neither faction could achieve their objectives while the other remained in control of chapter resources and personnel. Caridin's loyalists controlled key sections of the Broken Back, including the communications center and several armory sections, while Sarpedon's supporters held the command deck and the sacred reliquary where the Soul Spear was housed. This division of resources made it impossible for either faction to operate effectively without neutralizing the other's capabilities. The outbreak of fighting began with Caridin's attempt to secure the chapter's gene seed storage facilities, which he viewed as essential for preserving the soul drinker's genetic heritage and preventing further corruption. The Loyalist assault on the gene seed vaults involved battle brothers from the 3rd and 7th companies, supported by Tech Marines who had remained loyal to traditional imperial doctrine. Their objective was to establish control over the genetic material while preventing Sarpedon's faction from using it to create additional mutated battle brothers. The defense of the gene seed vaults was coordinated by Sergeant Grievous of the 1st Company, whose assault squads had been positioned to respond to internal threats following the Mechanicus conspiracy. The fighting in the vault complex demonstrated the tragic nature of the conflict, as battle brothers who had served together for decades found themselves engaged in lethal combat against former comrades. The confined spaces of the vault complex negated many of the tactical advantages typically enjoyed by Astartes forces, forcing both sides to rely on close-quarters combat skills and individual heroism. The battle for the gene seed vaults lasted for 6 hours, with neither side able to achieve decisive victory despite suffering significant casualties. The Loyalist assault succeeded in securing portions of the facility, but Sarpedon's supporters maintained control of the primary storage chambers and the specialized equipment required for gene seed processing. The stalemate forced both factions to consider alternative strategies while treating their wounded and consolidating their positions within the contested areas of the fortress monastery. Captain Drio of the 6th Company played a crucial role in Sarpedon's military response to the Loyalist uprising, coordinating the defense of key strategic positions while organizing counterattacks designed to isolate and neutralize Caridin's forces. Drio's tactical expertise and his company's experience in urban warfare provided Sarpedon's faction with significant advantages in the confined environment of the Brokenback's interior spaces. His forces utilized their knowledge of the fortress monastery's layout to establish defensive positions that maximized their firepower while minimizing their exposure to Loyalist attacks. The fighting spread throughout the Brokenback as both factions attempted to secure strategic objectives that would provide decisive advantages in the ongoing conflict. The Loyalists focused on controlling the ship's communication systems and navigation equipment, hoping to contact Imperial authorities and request assistance in suppressing what they viewed as a heretical rebellion. Sarpedon's supporters prioritized the protection of the chapter's sacred relics and the maintenance of operational security that would prevent external intervention in what they considered an internal chapter matter. The battle for the communications center involved some of the most intense fighting of the entire conflict, as both sides recognized the strategic importance of controlling external communications. The Loyalists needed to establish contact with Imperial authorities to legitimize their resistance and request support, while Sarpedon's faction required communications blackout to prevent Imperial intervention that might tip the balance in favor of the traditionalist forces. The center's defensive systems had been designed to repel external attackers rather than internal threats, creating tactical challenges that forced both sides to develop innovative assault and defense strategies. Techmarine Ligris found himself in the difficult position of maintaining the Brokenback's essential systems, while battle brothers from both factions demanded his support for their respective causes. The Master of the Forge's primary concern was preserving the fortress monastery's operational integrity and preventing damage to critical systems that could not be easily repaired. His attempts to remain neutral in the conflict proved impossible, as both sides required technical support for their operations, forcing him to make choices that effectively aligned him with Sarpedon's faction despite his personal reservations about the mutations. The Loyalist forces achieved their most significant success during the assault on the chapter's armory sections, where they captured substantial quantities of weapons and ammunition that had been stored for emergency use. This victory provided them with the resources necessary to sustain prolonged resistance, while demonstrating their ability to conduct effective offensive operations despite being outnumbered by Sarpedon's supporters. The captured equipment included several pieces of specialized archaeotech that had been acquired during the chapter's earlier campaigns, items that the Loyalists hoped to use as evidence of their legitimacy when Imperial authorities eventually responded to their communications. The turning point in the conflict came when Sarpedon personally led an assault on the Loyalist positions in the communications center, wielding the Soul Spear and demonstrating the enhanced combat capabilities provided by his mutations. The chapter master's transformed physiology allowed him to navigate the complex three-dimensional environment of the ship's interior with unprecedented agility, while his psychic abilities provided tactical awareness that exceeded anything available to his opponents. His presence on the battlefield had a profound psychological impact on both factions, inspiring his supporters while demoralizing the Loyalists who witnessed his superhuman capabilities. The assault on the communications center demonstrated the decisive advantages provided by Sarpedon's mutations and his connection to the Soul Spear, as he was able to engage multiple opponents simultaneously while maintaining tactical awareness of the broader battle situation. His 8 legs provided stability and mobility that allowed him to fight effectively in zero-gravity sections of the ship, while his enhanced reflexes and precognitive abilities enabled him to anticipate and counter enemy tactics with supernatural precision. The Loyalist defenders found themselves unable to coordinate effective resistance against an opponent who could predict their movements and exploit their weaknesses with inhuman efficiency. Captain Carradin's final stand occurred in the chapter's sacred chapel, where he had gathered the remaining loyalist forces for a last desperate attempt to prevent what he viewed as the chapter's fall into heresy. The captain's choice of location reflected his belief that the conflict was fundamentally spiritual in nature, requiring resolution within the sacred space where the chapter's oaths and traditions had been maintained for centuries. His forces had barricaded themselves within the chapel's confines, using the sacred architecture to create defensive positions that would force Sarpedon's faction to commit sacrilege in order to achieve victory. The final battle in the chapel involved direct combat between Sarpedon and Carradin, as both leaders recognized that the conflict could only be resolved through personal confrontation. The captain's traditional power armor and master-crafted weapons represented the orthodox imperial military tradition, while Sarpedon's mutations and the soul's spear embodied the chapter's transformation and departure from established doctrine. Their duels symbolized the broader philosophical conflict that had torn the chapter apart, with each combatant fighting not just for victory, but for the validation of their interpretation of duty and loyalty. Carradin's death marked the effective end of organized loyalist resistance, as the captain's followers either surrendered or fled to other parts of the fortress monastery, where they could avoid immediate capture. The loyalist faction's collapse was accelerated by the psychological impact of witnessing their leader's defeat at the hands of their mutated chapter master, an outcome that seemed to validate Sarpedon's arguments about the practical advantages provided by the transformations. The remaining loyalists faced the choice between accepting Sarpedon's authority or attempting to escape the Brokenback to seek refuge with other imperial forces. The aftermath of the Civil War left the Soul Drinkers significantly weakened in terms of personnel and resources, with approximately 30% of the chapter's strength lost to casualties, defections, and the destruction of equipment during the fighting. The survivors faced the challenge of rebuilding their organizational structure while maintaining operational effectiveness in the face of inevitable imperial investigation and potential retaliation. Sarpedon's consolidation of power required not only the elimination of remaining opposition, but also the development of new command structures that could accommodate the chapter's transformed nature and their separation from imperial oversight. The integration of the loyalist survivors into Sarpedon's command structure proved challenging, as many retained reservations about the mutations and the chapter's departure from imperial doctrine despite their acceptance of the new leadership. These battle brothers required careful management and gradual indoctrination into the chapter's evolving belief system, while their skills and experience remained valuable for maintaining operational capability. Sarpedon's approach to this integration emphasized practical cooperation over ideological conversion, allowing former loyalists to serve effectively while gradually adapting to the chapter's new direction. The immediate aftermath of the Civil War left the Soul Drinkers in a precarious position that demanded swift and decisive action to prevent their complete destruction at the hands of imperial forces. Sarpedon's consolidation of power within the chapter had eliminated internal opposition, but the broader implications of their fratricidal conflict could not be contained within the confines of the Brokenback. The loyalist forces who had escaped during the final stages of the fighting carried detailed knowledge of the chapter's mutations and their rejection of imperial authority, information that would inevitably reach imperial command structures and trigger investigations that could result in the chapter's classification as traitors. The chapter master's analysis of their strategic situation revealed that traditional approaches to managing imperial relations would prove inadequate given the extent of their deviation from orthodox doctrine. The mutations spreading through the chapter's ranks made it impossible to conceal their transformation from imperial observers, while their refusal to submit to genetic investigation had already established them as potential threats to imperial security. The death of Captain Carradin and his loyalist supporters had eliminated any possibility of internal reconciliation with imperial authority, forcing the chapter to choose between submission that would likely result in their destruction or open defiance that would brand them as renegades. Sarpedon's decision to formally declare the Soul Drinkers' independence from imperial authority represented a calculated response to circumstances that left no viable alternative. The chapter master's proclamation, delivered to the assembled battle brothers in the chapter's sacred chapel, where Caradin had made his final stand, emphasized that their loyalty to the emperor remained absolute, while their obedience to the corrupt institutions claiming to represent his will had ended. This distinction between service to the emperor and submission to imperial bureaucracy provided the theological foundation for their separation from the command structures that had previously governed their operations. The philosophical framework underlying this declaration drew heavily from Sarpedon's analysis of the Mechanicus conspiracy and his observations of imperial institutional behavior during the chapter's centuries of service. The chapter master argued that the Imperium's vast bureaucratic apparatus had become corrupted by competing interests and political considerations that prioritized organizational advantage over humanity's protection. The willingness of supposedly loyal imperial institutions to betray their Astartes' allies for technological gain demonstrated that the system had lost sight of its original purpose, requiring independent action by those who remained committed to the Emperor's true vision. This theological position required careful articulation to distinguish the Soul Drinkers' rebellion from the heretical movements that had plagued the Imperium throughout its history. Sarpedon emphasized that their defiance targeted corrupt institutions rather than the Emperor himself, arguing that true loyalty required resistance to those who had perverted the imperial system for their own benefit. The chapter's mutations were presented as gifts from the Emperor, designed to enhance their ability to serve his will independently of the compromised command structures that could no longer be trusted to provide appropriate guidance or support. The practical implementation of this independence required immediate action to secure the chapter's operational capabilities and prevent imperial retaliation from destroying them before they could establish sustainable resistance. The Soul Drinkers' fleet-based configuration provided certain advantages in this regard, as their fortress monastery and supporting vessels could maintain mobility while avoiding the fixed positions that would make them vulnerable to imperial siege operations. However, their limited resources and reduced manpower following the Civil War created significant challenges for maintaining long-term operational effectiveness without access to imperial supply networks and recruitment infrastructure. The chapter's first priority involved securing alternative sources of equipment and supplies that could replace their previous dependence on imperial logistics systems. The Soul Drinkers had maintained relationships with various forge worlds and manufacturing facilities throughout their service, relationships that might provide access to weapons and equipment despite their changed status. However, these connections required careful management to prevent imperial authorities from using them to track the chapter's movements or compromise their operational security. Techmarine Ligris played a crucial role in developing strategies for maintaining the chapter's technological capabilities without relying on imperial support systems. The Master of the Forge's extensive knowledge of imperial manufacturing processes and his relationships with various Mechanicus facilities provided valuable insights into alternative sources of equipment and spare parts. His approach emphasized the acquisition of manufacturing capabilities rather than finished products, allowing the chapter to maintain their equipment through independent production rather than continued dependence on external suppliers. The chapter's recruitment challenges proved more complex than their supply problems, as their separation from imperial authority eliminated access to the recruitment worlds and selection processes that had previously provided new battle brothers. The Soul Drinkers' traditional recruiting grounds on Selaka and other worlds within their operational zone remained under imperial control, making it impossible to continue their established selection and training procedures without exposing potential recruits to imperial retaliation. The chapter required new approaches to recruitment that could identify suitable candidates while maintaining operational security and avoiding imperial detection. Sarpedon's solution to these recruitment challenges involved expanding the chapter's selection criteria to include candidates from populations that had been overlooked or rejected by imperial authorities. The Soul Drinkers began recruiting from criminal organizations, rebel groups, and other populations that existed outside imperial control, focusing on individuals who possessed the physical and mental qualities necessary for Astartes transformation, while lacking the institutional loyalty that might compromise their commitment to the chapter's independent mission. This approach provided access to recruits who were already alienated from imperial authority, while possessing the survival skills and psychological resilience required for the chapter's demanding operations. The transformation of these unconventional recruits required modifications to the chapter's training procedures and indoctrination protocols, as many lacked the basic education and cultural background that imperial recruiting worlds typically provided. The Soul Drinkers developed accelerated training programs that emphasized practical skills over theoretical knowledge, while their indoctrination focused on loyalty to the chapter and the Emperor rather than broader imperial doctrine. These modifications proved successful in creating effective battle brothers who were fully committed to the chapter's mission, while remaining unencumbered by traditional imperial prejudices and limitations. The chapter's early conflicts with imperial forces began with encounters that seemed coincidental, but gradually revealed the systematic nature of imperial efforts to locate and destroy the renegade Astartes. The first significant engagement occurred when the Soul Drinkers intercepted an Imperial Guard convoy that had been transporting archaeotech artifacts similar to those in the chapter's collection. The convoy's cargo included items that had been recovered from the same vault complex where the Soul Spear had been discovered, suggesting that imperial authorities possessed detailed knowledge of the chapter's sacred relics and their origins. The assault on the Imperial Guard convoy demonstrated the tactical advantages provided by the Soul Drinkers' mutations and their liberation from imperial operational constraints. Sarpedon's enhanced mobility and precognitive abilities allowed him to coordinate complex multi-dimensional attacks that overwhelmed the convoy's defenses, while his battle brothers utilized their transformed capabilities to achieve objectives that would have been impossible for unmodified Astartes. The engagement's success validated the chapter's decision to embrace their mutations while providing valuable intelligence about imperial knowledge of their activities and resources. The intelligence gathered from the convoy's personnel and documentation revealed that the Soul Drinkers had become the subject of a coordinated imperial investigation involving multiple organizations and significant resources. The Inquisition had classified the chapter as a potential threat requiring immediate neutralization, while various Mechanicus Forge worlds had provided technical support for tracking their movements and analyzing their capabilities. This investigation had identified several of the chapter's previous operational patterns and supply sources, forcing them to abandon established procedures and develop new approaches to maintaining their independence. The chapter's response to this imperial investigation involved a series of preemptive strikes designed to eliminate threats before they could develop into serious challenges to their survival. The Soul Drinkers targeted imperial intelligence networks, supply depots, and communication facilities that supported the investigation, using their superior mobility and combat effectiveness to achieve tactical surprise while avoiding prolonged engagements that might expose them to imperial reinforcements. These operations demonstrated their commitment to active resistance rather than passive evasion, establishing patterns of behavior that would define their future relationship with imperial authority. The most significant early conflict occurred when the Soul Drinkers encountered a strike force from the Imperial Fists chapter that had been dispatched to investigate reports of renegade Astartes activity in the sector. The Imperial Fists represented the Soul Drinkers' genetic heritage and their previous connection to orthodox imperial doctrine, making this confrontation particularly significant from both tactical and symbolic perspectives. The engagement took place in the asteroid fields surrounding the dead world of Vanqualis, where both forces had been drawn by reports of archaeotech caches that might provide strategic advantages. The battle with their parent chapter's successors forced the Soul Drinkers to confront the full implications of their separation from Imperial authority, as they found themselves engaged in lethal combat against Astartes who shared their genetic heritage and their commitment to the Emperor's service. The Imperial Fist's tactical doctrine emphasized defensive operations and siege warfare, approaches that proved less effective against the Soul Drinkers' enhanced mobility and psychological warfare techniques. Sarpedon's mutations allowed him to exploit weaknesses in Imperial Fist's formations, while his battle brothers utilized their transformed capabilities to achieve tactical advantages that compensated for their numerical disadvantage. The engagement's outcome demonstrated both the effectiveness of the Soul Drinkers' new capabilities and the tragic nature of their separation from the broader Astartes Brotherhood. The Imperial Fist's strike force was effectively destroyed, with only a handful of survivors escaping to report the encounter to Imperial authorities. The victory provided the Soul Drinkers with additional equipment and intelligence, while establishing their reputation as a serious threat to Imperial forces, but it also marked their irreversible transition from loyal servants to active enemies of the Imperium they had once served. The psychological impact of this fratricidal combat affected the Soul Drinkers' battle brothers in ways that extended beyond immediate tactical considerations. Many had served alongside Imperial Fist successors during joint operations and maintained respect for their shared heritage and common purpose. The necessity of killing fellow Astartes who remained loyal to Imperial authority created internal tensions that required careful management to prevent demoralization or the development of doubts about their chosen path. Sarpedon's leadership during this period emphasized the distinction between their enemies' institutional loyalty and their own commitment to the Emperor's true will, arguing that the Imperial Fists had been deceived by corrupt authorities rather than acting from genuine understanding of their duty. The chapter's adaptation to their new status as renegades required fundamental changes in their operational procedures and strategic thinking. The Soul Drinkers could no longer rely on Imperial intelligence networks or support systems, forcing them to develop independent capabilities for gathering information and analyzing threats. Their operations required careful planning to avoid Imperial detection while maintaining the aggressive tempo necessary for achieving their objectives before enemy reinforcements could respond. This operational environment demanded flexibility and innovation that challenged traditional Astartes doctrine while providing opportunities for the chapter to develop unique tactical approaches. The establishment of hidden supply caches and safe houses throughout their operational zone provided the Soul Drinkers with the infrastructure necessary for sustained resistance against Imperial forces. These facilities were carefully concealed within asteroid fields, abandoned space stations, and other locations that offered protection from Imperial surveillance while providing access to the resources needed for extended operations. The chapter's Techmarines worked extensively to ensure these facilities could support their enhanced operational requirements while remaining undetectable to Imperial search efforts. The Soul Drinkers' relationship with other renegade and rebel groups evolved gradually as they established their independence from Imperial authority. The chapter's unique capabilities and resources made them valuable allies for various anti-Imperial movements, while their commitment to the Emperor's service distinguished them from chaos-corrupted forces that sought to destroy rather than reform the Imperium. These relationships required careful management to prevent the chapter from becoming associated with heretical movements, while providing access to intelligence and resources that enhanced their operational effectiveness. The development of new tactical doctrines that incorporated the chapter's mutations and their separation from Imperial constraints represented a significant evolution in their military capabilities. The Soul Drinkers began experimenting with operational approaches that would have been impossible under Imperial oversight, including extended deep strike operations, psychological warfare campaigns, and targeted assassinations of Imperial officials who posed threats to their survival. These tactics proved highly effective against Imperial forces that had been trained to counter conventional Astartes operations, but lacked experience dealing with the enhanced capabilities and unconventional approaches that characterized the transformed chapter. The chapter's growing reputation as effective renegades attracted attention from various Imperial organizations that sought to understand and counter their capabilities. The Inquisition increased their investigation efforts, while various Astartes chapters received briefings about the Soul Drinkers' transformation and their tactical innovations. This attention created both challenges and opportunities for the chapter, as Imperial efforts to counter their operations provided intelligence about enemy capabilities, while the increased scrutiny made it more difficult to maintain operational security and avoid detection during their missions. The Soul Drinkers' first significant encounter with the forces of chaos occurred during their raid on the Imperial supply depot at Zirian Prime, where they discovered that their target had already been compromised by a chaos cult that had infiltrated the facility's security forces. The depot's personnel had been systematically corrupted over several months through a combination of psychological manipulation and demonic influence, transforming what should have been a routine supply seizure into a complex three-way engagement involving Imperial defenders, chaos cultists, and the renegade Astartes. The cultists had been conducting rituals within the depot's storage areas, using the accumulated military supplies as offerings to their dark patrons, while preparing for a larger summoning that would have devastated the surrounding system. Sarpedon's psychic abilities immediately detected the taint of chaos corruption permeating the facility, manifesting as a nauseating psychic miasma that interfered with his precognitive senses and created disorienting effects among his battle brothers. The corruption had seeped into the depot's very structure, causing metal to corrode in unnatural patterns while creating localized reality distortions that made navigation difficult even for enhanced Astartes senses. The Soul Drinkers found themselves fighting not only against human cultists, but also against the environment itself, as the facility's compromised machine spirits responded to their presence with hostile behavior that exceeded normal defensive protocols. The cultists' leader, a former Imperial Guard colonel named Vex Korath, had undergone transformation through extended exposure to chaos energies that had granted him superhuman strength and resilience while corrupting his appearance beyond recognition. His body displayed the characteristic mutations of chaos worship, including additional limbs that terminated in razor-sharp claws, skin that had hardened into chitinous plates, and eyes that burned with unnatural fire. The colonel's tactical knowledge of Imperial military doctrine, combined with his enhanced physical capabilities, made him a formidable opponent who could anticipate and counter many of the Soul Drinkers' standard assault techniques. The engagement at Zirian Prime demonstrated the fundamental differences between the Soul Drinkers' mutations and the corruption inflicted by chaos worship. While Sarpedon's transformation had enhanced his combat effectiveness and tactical awareness without compromising his mental faculties or moral judgment, the cultists displayed the characteristic degradation of personality and reasoning ability that accompanied exposure to chaos influence. The cultists fought with fanatical determination, but lacked the tactical coordination and strategic thinking that made the Soul Drinkers effective, relying instead on overwhelming numbers and the supernatural advantages provided by their demonic patrons. The battle's progression revealed the Soul Drinkers' natural resistance to chaos corruption, as their mutations seemed to provide protection against the psychic contamination that had overwhelmed the depot's original defenders. Battle brothers who came into direct contact with chaos-tainted materials or enemies showed no signs of the spiritual degradation that typically resulted from such exposure, while their enhanced physical capabilities allowed them to engage corrupted opponents on equal terms. This resistance appeared to be linked to their connection with the Soul Spear and the other sacred artifacts in their possession, which generated protective auras that countered the influence of chaos energies. Chaplain Ictinos played a crucial role in maintaining the chapter's spiritual integrity during this encounter, conducting battlefield purification rituals that cleansed areas contaminated by chaos influence, while providing psychological support to battle brothers who had been exposed to particularly disturbing manifestations of corruption. The chaplain's theological framework for understanding the chapter's mutations proved essential in distinguishing between their beneficial transformations and the degrading effects of chaos corruption, helping battle brothers maintain their sense of righteousness and purpose despite the horrific nature of their opponents. The discovery of a nascent demon prince within the depot's central storage facility marked the engagement's climactic phase, as the cultists' rituals had successfully summoned a minor entity of chaos that was in the process of manifesting in real space. The demon's presence created reality distortions that affected the fundamental laws of physics within its immediate vicinity, causing weapons to malfunction unpredictably while creating temporal anomalies that made coordinated tactical movements extremely difficult. The entity's form shifted constantly between various configurations, making it impossible to predict its capabilities or identify vulnerable points that might be exploited during combat. Sarpedon's confrontation with the Demon Prince demonstrated both the effectiveness of the Soul Spear against chaos entities and the psychological challenges posed by direct exposure to the warp's corrupting influence. The weapon's psychic emanations seemed to cause the demon significant distress, disrupting its ability to maintain coherent form while preventing it from utilizing its most powerful abilities. However, the entity's presence created a psychic feedback loop that threatened to overwhelm even Sarpedon's enhanced mental defenses, forcing him to rely on his battle brother's support while maintaining the concentration necessary to wield the Soul Spear effectively. The demon's destruction required the combined efforts of the entire strike force, with battle brothers from multiple squads coordinating their attacks to exploit the vulnerabilities created by the Soul Spear's disruption of the entity's cohesion. The engagement demonstrated the importance of maintaining unit cohesion and mutual support when facing chaos opponents, as individual battle brothers proved vulnerable to the demon's reality warping abilities despite their enhanced capabilities. The successful banishment of the entity validated the Soul Drinker's belief that their mutations provided advantages in combating chaos forces, while reinforcing their commitment to opposing the Dark Gods despite their separation from Imperial authority. The aftermath of the Xerian Prime engagement provided valuable intelligence about chaos infiltration methods and the tactical challenges posed by corrupted Imperial facilities. The Soul Drinkers discovered that the cult had been operating for several months before their arrival, using legitimate supply requisitions to accumulate the materials necessary for their summoning rituals while maintaining the appearance of normal military operations. This discovery highlighted the insidious nature of chaos corruption and the difficulty of detecting such infiltration without specialized knowledge or psychic abilities. The chapter's analysis of the cultists' methods revealed sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques that had been used to corrupt the depot's personnel gradually over time. The cult had identified individuals with personal grievances against Imperial authority or psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited through targeted propaganda and supernatural influence. This approach had allowed them to build a substantial network of corrupted personnel while avoiding the dramatic behavioral changes that might have triggered security investigations or attracted unwanted attention from Imperial authorities. The Soul Drinkers' second major encounter with chaos forces occurred during their investigation of distress signals from the mining world of Thracian Primaris, where they discovered that the planet's population had been systematically corrupted by word-bearers Chaos Space Marines who had established a hidden base within the world's extensive underground tunnel networks. The word-bearers had been conducting a long-term campaign of religious subversion, gradually replacing the planet's imperial cult with chaos worship while maintaining the appearance of orthodox religious observance. Their success in corrupting an entire world's population demonstrated the sophisticated nature of chaos infiltration and the challenges faced by those attempting to resist such influence. The The Word-Bearers' approach to corruption differed significantly from the crude methods employed by the cultists at Xerion Prime, as the Chaos Space Marines possessed centuries of experience in religious manipulation and psychological warfare. Their leader, Dark Apostle Jarulek, had spent decades studying Imperial religious doctrine and identifying weaknesses that could be exploited to introduce chaos elements without triggering immediate resistance. The Word-Bearers had gradually modified the planet's religious ceremonies and texts, introducing subtle changes that slowly shifted the population's worship from the Emperor to the Dark Gods while maintaining familiar rituals and terminology. The confrontation with the Word-Bearers forced the Soul Drinkers to engage in ideological warfare as well as physical combat, as both sides claimed to represent the true path of service to higher powers. Jarulek attempted to convince Sarpedon that the Soul Drinkers' mutations and separation from Imperial authority represented the beginning of their inevitable corruption by chaos, arguing that their resistance to Imperial oversight demonstrated the same rebellious spirit that had led the traitor legions to embrace the Dark Gods. The Dark Apostles' arguments were sophisticated and well-reasoned, requiring careful theological refutation to prevent them from undermining the chapter's confidence in their chosen path. Sarpedon's response to these ideological challenges drew heavily from his understanding of the Emperor's true nature and his analysis of the differences between beneficial mutation and chaos corruption. The chapter master argued that the Soul Drinkers' transformations enhanced their humanity rather than replacing it with alien influence, while their continued commitment to protecting human populations demonstrated their loyalty to the Emperor's vision for humanity's future. This theological position required constant reinforcement through practical demonstration, as the chapter's actions would ultimately validate or disprove their claims about serving the Emperor's will independently of Imperial institutional authority. The Word-Bearers' corruption of Thracian Primaris had created a population that was fanatically devoted to chaos while maintaining the organizational structure and technological capabilities of an Imperial world. The corrupted miners and administrators fought with the discipline and coordination of trained Imperial forces while displaying the enhanced physical capabilities and supernatural resilience that accompanied Chaos Blessing. This combination made them formidable opponents who could utilize familiar Imperial tactics while possessing advantages that exceeded normal human limitations. The underground battle for Thracian Primaris tested the Soul Drinkers' ability to operate in confined spaces while maintaining their tactical advantages over conventional opponents. The mining tunnels provided natural defensive positions that negated many of the mobility advantages provided by Sarpedon's mutations, while the Word-Bearers' familiarity with the tunnel network allowed them to coordinate ambushes and flanking maneuvers that exploited the Soul Drinkers' unfamiliarity with the terrain. The engagement required innovative tactical approaches that combined traditional Astartes assault techniques with the enhanced capabilities provided by the chapter's transformations. The Soul Drinkers' discovery of the Word-Bearers' ritual sites revealed the extent of the corruption that had taken hold on Thracian Primaris, as entire sections of the mining complex had been converted into temples dedicated to the Dark Gods. These facilities contained altars constructed from processed human remains, libraries of forbidden texts that detailed chaos rituals and theological arguments, and summoning circles that had been used to manifest demonic entities within the planet's underground spaces. The scale of these installations demonstrated the Word-Bearers' long-term commitment to corrupting the world while providing evidence of their success in subverting an entire planetary population. The confrontation between Sarpedon and Dark Apostle Jarulek took place within the largest of these ritual chambers, where the Word-Bearers had constructed an elaborate shrine to the Chaos Gods that incorporated elements from multiple Dark Age technologies. The chamber's architecture created acoustic effects that amplified the Dark Apostle's voice while generating subsonic frequencies that induced fear and disorientation in normal humans. However, the Soul Drinkers' enhanced physiology and their connection to the Soul Spear provided protection against these psychological attacks, allowing them to engage the word-bearers on equal terms despite the environmental advantages their opponents had prepared. The battle demonstrated the fundamental incompatibility between the Soul Drinkers' approach to transformation and the word-bearers' embrace of chaos corruption. While both forces had undergone physical and spiritual changes that separated them from baseline humanity, the nature of these modifications reflected entirely different philosophical approaches to transcendence. The Soul Drinkers' mutations enhanced their existing capabilities while maintaining their essential humanity, while the Word-Bearers' corruption had replaced human characteristics with alien influences that served the Dark God's purposes rather than human needs. Jarulek's death during the final confrontation required the combined efforts of Sarpedon and several battle brothers, as the Dark Apostle's centuries of chaos worship had granted him supernatural resilience and access to psychic powers that exceeded those of normal space marines. The Word-Bearer's corruption had enhanced his physical strength and endurance, while providing him with the ability to channel demonic energies through his weapons and armor. However, his reliance on chaos powers made him vulnerable to the Soul Spear's disruption effects, which interfered with his connection to the warp and prevented him from accessing his most powerful abilities. The destruction of the Word-Bearer's base on Thracian Primaris eliminated a significant chaos threat while providing the Soul Drinkers with valuable intelligence about chaos infiltration methods and long-term corruption strategies. The chapter's analysis of the Word-Bearer's documentation revealed similar operations on other worlds throughout the sector, indicating that the Chaos Space Marines had been conducting a systematic campaign of religious subversion that threatened multiple Imperial systems. This intelligence proved valuable for identifying potential targets for future Soul Drinkers operations, while demonstrating the scope of the chaos threat that existed beyond Imperial awareness. The chapter's third major encounter with Chaos forces occurred when they intercepted a Black Legion warband that had been conducting raids against Imperial shipping lanes in the Cadian sector. The Black Legion forces were led by a Chaos Lord named Urkrathos, whose warbands specialized in rapid strike operations designed to capture Imperial vessels and their crews for use in dark rituals and slave labor. The warband's composition included veteran Chaos Space Marines from multiple traitor legions, demon engines that had been corrupted through millennia of warp exposure, and cultist auxiliaries recruited from the populations of worlds they had conquered. The engagement with the Black Legion tested the Soul Drinkers' ability to conduct void warfare while maintaining their tactical advantages over opponents who possessed similar capabilities and experience. The Chaos Warband's vessels had been extensively modified with demonic enhancements that provided supernatural speed and resilience, while incorporating weapon systems that fired ammunition blessed by the Dark Gods. These modifications made the enemy ships formidable opponents that could engage Imperial vessels on equal terms while possessing advantages that exceeded normal technological capabilities. The boarding actions that characterized this engagement demonstrated the Soul Drinkers' superiority in close-quarters combat, as their mutations provided significant advantages in the confined spaces of starship corridors and compartments. Sarpedon's enhanced mobility allowed him to navigate the complex three-dimensional environment of enemy vessels with unprecedented effectiveness, while his battle brothers' transformed capabilities enabled them to exploit weaknesses in Chaos Space Marine formations that had been optimized for fighting normal Astartes opponents. The chapter's psychological warfare techniques proved particularly effective against cultist auxiliaries, who lacked the mental conditioning necessary to resist fear-based attacks. The Black Legion's use of demon engines created unique tactical challenges that required innovative approaches to overcome supernatural opponents that combined mechanical resilience with demonic abilities. These entities possessed the durability and firepower of conventional war machines, while displaying the unpredictable behavior and reality warping capabilities that characterized demonic manifestations. The Soul Drinkers discovered that their enhanced weapons and the Soul Spear's emanations could disrupt the binding rituals that maintained these entities' coherence, causing them to lose cohesion and return to the warp from which they had been summoned. The confrontation with Chaos Lord Krathos revealed the psychological impact of millennia of chaos worship on former Imperial Space Marines, as the Black Legion commander retained tactical knowledge and combat skills from his original training, while displaying the megalomania and cruelty that characterized long-term exposure to chaos influence. The Chaos Lord's armor had been extensively modified with demonic enhancements that provided supernatural protection while incorporating weapon systems that fired projectiles infused with warp energy. His combat style combined traditional Astartes techniques with unpredictable elements that reflected his corruption by chaos powers. The Soul Drinkers' victory over the Black Legion warband provided them with additional ships and equipment while demonstrating their effectiveness against experienced chaos opponents. The captured vessels required extensive purification to remove chaos contamination, but their acquisition significantly enhanced the chapter's operational capabilities and provided them with the resources necessary for extended independent operations. The intelligence gathered from captured Black Legion personnel revealed information about chaos activities throughout the sector, while confirming the Soul Drinkers' reputation as a significant threat to both Imperial and Chaos forces. The chapter's resistance to chaos corruption during these encounters appeared to be linked to their unique relationship with the Soul Spear and their theological framework for understanding their mutations. The weapon's psychic emanations created protective effects that shielded battle brothers from the spiritual contamination that typically resulted from exposure to chaos influence, while their belief in serving the emperors provided psychological anchoring that prevented the doubt and despair that often preceded corruption. This natural resistance made them particularly effective against chaos opponents while validating their claims about the beneficial nature of their transformations. The Soul Drinkers' encounters with various chaos entities revealed patterns in their opponents' behavior and capabilities that provided valuable tactical intelligence for future engagements. Demon princes proved vulnerable to concentrated psychic attacks that disrupted their connection to the warp, while corrupted humans could be demoralized through targeted psychological warfare that exploited their remaining human fears and doubts. Chaos Space Marines required different approaches depending on their legion of origin and the extent of their corruption, with some retaining enough tactical discipline to pose serious threats, while others had degenerated into barely controlled berserkers. The chapter's development of specialized anti-chaos tactics incorporated their enhanced capabilities while taking advantage of their opponent's psychological and spiritual weaknesses. The Soul Drinkers learned to exploit the arrogance and overconfidence that characterized many chaos champions, using feigned retreats and tactical deceptions to lure enemies into disadvantageous positions where their superior numbers or supernatural abilities could be neutralized. These tactics proved particularly effective against opponents who had become accustomed to the fear and desperation that their presence typically inspired in Imperial forces. The psychological warfare between maintaining loyalty to the Emperor while being branded as traitors created ongoing challenges for the Soul Drinkers' mental stability and unit cohesion. Battle brothers struggled with the contradiction between their continued service to humanity and their classification as enemies by the very institutions they sought to protect. This internal conflict required constant management through chaplain counseling and reinforcement of their theological framework, while successful operations against chaos forces provided validation of their chosen path and evidence of their continued righteousness. The decision to infiltrate the Phalanx, the massive fortress monastery of the Imperial Fists, emerged from Sarpedon's growing obsession with understanding the true origins of the Soul Drinkers' gene seed corruption. The mutation spreading through his chapter had accelerated following their encounters with chaos forces, yet their resistance to corruption remained absolute. This paradox demanded answers that could only be found within the genetic archives of their parent chapter, archives that contained the original templates and modification records that had shaped the Soul Drinkers during their founding centuries earlier. The chapter master's analysis of available intelligence suggested that the Imperial Fists maintained comprehensive records of all successor chapters' genetic modifications, including experimental procedures that had been classified or officially denied. The phalanx represented one of the most heavily defended locations in Imperial space, a fortress monastery that had served as the Imperial Fists' mobile headquarters for millennia. The massive structure combined the functions of a battle station, monastery, and mobile fortress, housing thousands of space marines alongside the chapter's most sacred relics and archives. Its defenses included multiple layers of void shields, weapons batteries capable of destroying entire fleets, and internal security systems that had been refined through centuries of warfare against the Imperium's enemies. The Fortress Monastery's crew included not only Imperial Fist's battle brothers, but also thousands of chapter serfs, tech marines, and support personnel who maintained its complex systems. Sarpedon's infiltration plan required exploiting the phalanx's role as a coordination center for Imperial Fist successor chapters, as the Fortress Monastery regularly received visits from representatives of various chapters seeking guidance, supplies, or coordination for joint operations. The Soul Drinker's genetic heritage provided them with the biological markers necessary to pass initial security screenings, while their knowledge of Imperial Fist's protocols and traditions would allow them to maintain their deception during casual interactions. The plan called for a small team of Soul Drinkers to pose as representatives from a distant successor chapter, using forged documentation and carefully prepared cover identities to gain access to the Fortress Monastery's archives. The infiltration team consisted of Sarpedon himself, whose psychic abilities would be essential for navigating the phalanx's complex security systems and locating the specific archives they required. Sergeant Grievous of the First Company provided tactical expertise and knowledge of Imperial Fist's procedures, while Apothecary Carandin's medical background would be crucial for interpreting genetic data and identifying relevant information within the vast archives. The team's small size reflected the need for operational security while ensuring they possessed the specialized skills necessary for their mission's success. The approach to the phalanx required careful timing to coincide with a period of increased traffic that would help mask their arrival among legitimate visitors. The team utilized a captured Imperial transport vessel that had been extensively modified to conceal its true origins while maintaining the appearance of a standard chapter supply ship. The vessel's documentation identified it as belonging to the Angel's Exemplar, a successor chapter that operated in distant sectors and had limited contact with the Imperial Fist's main force. This cover identity provided plausible explanations for the team's unfamiliarity with current Imperial Fist's operations, while justifying their request for access to historical archives. The initial security screening process tested the team's preparation and their ability to maintain their deception under scrutiny from experienced Imperial Fists personnel. The Fortress Monastery's security protocols included genetic scanning, psychic evaluation, and detailed questioning about their chapter's recent activities and operational status. Sarpedon's psychic abilities allowed him to subtly influence the screening officer's perceptions, while providing advance warning of potentially dangerous questions or suspicious behavior. The team's extensive preparation and their genuine knowledge of Imperial Fist's culture enabled them to pass these initial challenges without arousing suspicion. The phalanx's interior architecture reflected the Imperial Fist's emphasis on defensive warfare and siege operations, with corridors designed to channel attackers into kill zones while providing defenders with overlapping fields of fire. The Fortress Monastery's layout incorporated multiple security checkpoints, redundant communication systems, and emergency protocols that could isolate compromised sections while maintaining overall operational integrity. The structure's vast size meant that even legitimate visitors required escort personnel to navigate between different sections, creating additional challenges for the infiltration team's movements. The chapter's archives occupied an entire section of the Fortress Monastery, housed within chambers that had been specifically designed to preserve ancient documents and genetic samples under optimal conditions. The archive complex included multiple levels of security, ranging from basic access controls that prevented unauthorized personnel from entering restricted areas to sophisticated detection systems that could identify genetic anomalies or psychic intrusion attempts. The archive's organization reflected millennia of accumulated records, with different sections dedicated to specific time periods, operational theaters, and administrative functions. Sarpedon's search for information about the Soul Drinker's origins required careful navigation through layers of classification and security protocols that had been designed to protect sensitive information about successor chapter creation and genetic modification procedures. The archives contained detailed records of the Soul Drinker's founding, including genetic profiles of their original battle brothers, modification procedures that had been applied to their gene seed, and correspondence with Adeptus Mechanicus facilities that had participated in their creation. This documentation revealed that the Soul Drinkers had been part of an experimental program designed to test genetic modifications that might enhance Astartes' capabilities in specific operational environments. The discovery of classified documents detailing the Soul Drinkers' experimental nature provided crucial insights into their mutations and their resistance to chaos corruption. The records indicated that their gene seed had been deliberately modified with genetic sequences derived from unknown sources, sequences that had been intended to provide adaptive advantages while maintaining stability and resistance to corruption. The modifications had been classified as experimental and potentially dangerous, leading to the Soul Drinkers' assignment to distant operational zones where they could be monitored without risking contamination of other chapters. The genetic modification program had been conducted under the supervision of Adeptus Mechanicus facilities that specialized in gene seed research and development, with particular involvement from Forge Worlds that had access to Dark Age of Technology archives. The program's objectives included creating Astartes who could operate effectively in environments with high levels of psychic contamination while maintaining resistance to chaos influence. The Soul Drinkers had been selected as test subjects due to their operational record and their isolation from other Imperial forces, making them ideal candidates for experimental procedures that might produce unpredictable results. The revelation that the Soul Drinkers had been created as experimental subjects, rather than standard successors, explained many of the anomalies in their development and their unique capabilities. Their mutations represented the intended outcome of the genetic modifications rather than corruption or degradation, while their resistance to chaos influence had been deliberately engineered to allow them to operate in environments where normal Astartes might be vulnerable. This understanding provided validation for their acceptance of their transformations, while explaining why their mutations differed fundamentally from chaos corruption. The archives also contained correspondence between Imperial Fist's leadership and various Imperial authorities regarding the Soul Drinkers' development and operational assignments. These documents revealed that the chapter's experimental nature had been carefully concealed from Imperial oversight bodies, including the Inquisition and the Adeptus Terra, to prevent interference with the research program. The Imperial Fists had assumed responsibility for monitoring their successor chapter's development while providing regular reports to the Mechanicus facilities that had conducted the original modifications. The discovery of these documents created a crisis of understanding for Sarpedon and his team, as they realized that their parent chapter had been complicit in their experimental creation while maintaining the deception that they were standard successors. The Imperial Fist's knowledge of their true nature meant that their current renegade status might be viewed as a predictable outcome of their experimental modifications rather than a tragic fall from grace. This realization raised questions about the Imperial Fist's current intentions and their potential response to the Soul Drinkers' infiltration of their fortress monastery. The team's presence within the archives had not gone unnoticed by the Phalanx's security systems, which had detected subtle anomalies in their behavior and access patterns that suggested they were not the legitimate representatives they claimed to be. The fortress monastery's internal security included sophisticated monitoring systems that tracked personnel movements while analyzing behavioral patterns for signs of deception or hostile intent. The team's extended time within the archives and their focus on specific classified documents had triggered automated alerts that brought them to the attention of the Imperial Fist's security personnel. Captain Lysander of the Imperial Fist's First Company had been monitoring the infiltration team's activities through the Fortress Monastery's surveillance systems, recognizing that their behavior patterns were inconsistent with legitimate research activities. The captain's extensive experience in security operations and his knowledge of Imperial Fist's procedures enabled him to identify discrepancies in the team's cover story while detecting subtle signs of their true nature. His investigation revealed that the Angels Exemplar chapter had no record of sending representatives to the Phalanx, while genetic analysis of security footage suggested that the visitors possessed gene seed characteristics that differed from standard Imperial Fist successors. The confrontation between the infiltration team and Imperial Fist's security forces occurred within the Archives complex itself, as Lysander led a strike team to apprehend the intruders while they were still accessing classified documents. The Imperial Fist's approach emphasized containment and capture rather than immediate elimination, as they sought to understand the intruders' objectives and determine whether they represented a broader threat to Imperial security. The archive complex's layout provided natural defensive positions that favored the defenders while limiting the infiltrators' mobility advantages. Sarpedon's revelation of his true identity and the nature of his mission created a moment of profound shock for the Imperial Fist's personnel, as they recognized their genetic kinship with the mutated chapter master, while struggling to reconcile his transformed appearance with their understanding of proper Astartes form. The chapter master's spider-like legs and enhanced physiology marked him as fundamentally different from standard space marines, while his continued adherence to Imperial Fist's tactical doctrines and cultural references demonstrated his genuine connection to their shared heritage. This contradiction between appearance and behavior created uncertainty among the Imperial Fists about how to respond to his presence. The battle within the archives demonstrated the tactical advantages provided by Sarpedon's mutations, while highlighting the fundamental differences between the Soul Drinker's approach to warfare and the Imperial Fist's defensive doctrine. The chapter master's enhanced mobility allowed him to navigate the complex three-dimensional environment of the archive complex with unprecedented effectiveness, while his precognitive abilities provided advance warning of Imperial Fist's tactical movements. His battle brothers utilized their own enhanced capabilities to exploit weaknesses in Imperial Fist's formations that had been optimized for conventional siege warfare rather than close-quarters combat against superhuman opponents. The Imperial Fist's response to the Soul Drinker's capabilities revealed their struggle to adapt established tactical doctrines to counter opponents who possessed similar training and genetic heritage while displaying enhanced physical capabilities. Captain Lysander's forces found themselves at a disadvantage in the confined spaces of the archive complex, where their preferred defensive tactics proved less effective against enemies who could exploit vertical surfaces and unconventional attack angles. The engagement required innovative approaches that combined traditional Imperial Fist's discipline with tactical flexibility that challenged their established procedures. The destruction of significant portions of the archive complex during the battle represented a catastrophic loss of irreplaceable historical records and genetic data that had been accumulated over millennia of Imperial Fist's operations. The fighting had damaged or destroyed documents that detailed the creation of numerous successor chapters, genetic modification procedures that could not be replicated, and strategic intelligence that had been gathered through centuries of warfare. This destruction created long-term consequences for the Imperial Fist's ability to support their successor chapters, while eliminating evidence of various experimental programs that had been conducted under their supervision. The confrontation's climax occurred when Sarpedon faced Captain Lysander in direct combat within the archive complex's central chamber, where the most sensitive documents were stored under maximum security. The Imperial Fist's captain represented the orthodox tradition of unwavering loyalty to imperial authority and adherence to established doctrine, while Sarpedon embodied the transformed potential of Astartes, who had embraced change and independence. Their duel symbolized the broader conflict between traditional imperial values and the adaptive evolution that the Soul Drinkers believed was necessary for humanity's survival. Lysander's combat skills and tactical experience made him a formidable opponent despite his lack of supernatural enhancements, as his mastery of Imperial Fist's fighting techniques and his superior equipment provided significant advantages in direct confrontation. The captain's Terminator armor offered protection against most conventional weapons, while his Thunder Hammer could deliver devastating attacks that threatened even enhanced opponents. However, Sarpedon's mutations provided mobility and spatial awareness that allowed him to avoid the captain's most powerful strikes while exploiting weaknesses in his defensive posture. The battle's outcome remained uncertain, as both combatants demonstrated exceptional skill and determination, with neither able to achieve decisive advantage despite their respective capabilities. Lysander's tactical discipline and superior equipment were balanced by Sarpedon's enhanced agility and precognitive abilities, creating a prolonged engagement that tested both warriors' endurance and adaptability. The fight's progression revealed the fundamental compatibility between their fighting styles despite their philosophical differences, as both had been shaped by the same tactical traditions and genetic heritage. The intervention of additional Imperial Fist's forces ultimately tipped the balance against the Soul Drinkers' infiltration team, as reinforcements arrived to support Captain Lysander, while the Archive complex's security systems activated additional defensive measures. The Soul Drinkers found themselves outnumbered and surrounded within the confined spaces of the Archive complex, where their mobility advantages were negated by the overwhelming firepower that the Imperial Fists could bring to bear. The team's extraction required desperate measures that involved significant casualties and the abandonment of their original mission objectives. The aftermath of the Phalanx incident created lasting consequences for both chapters' relationships with Imperial authority and their understanding of their respective roles within the broader Astartes Brotherhood. The Soul Drinkers' infiltration had revealed the experimental nature of their creation, while demonstrating their continued adherence to Imperial Fists' tactical doctrines and cultural values. The Imperial Fists were forced to confront the reality that their renegade successors remained fundamentally loyal to the Emperor despite their separation from Imperial authority, creating moral and theological challenges that could not be resolved through conventional military responses. The intelligence gathered during the infiltration provided the Soul Drinkers with crucial insights into their origins and the nature of their mutations, validating their belief that their transformations represented beneficial evolution rather than corruption. The discovery that they had been created as experimental subjects explained their unique capabilities while providing justification for their continued independence from Imperial oversight. This knowledge strengthened their resolve to pursue their own interpretation of the Emperor's will, while maintaining their commitment to protecting humanity from its enemies. The Imperial Fist's response to the incident involved extensive internal debate about their responsibilities toward their renegade successors and the appropriate measures for dealing with Astartes who had maintained their essential loyalty while rejecting Imperial authority. The chapter's leadership struggled to reconcile their duty to Imperial command structures with their recognition that the Soul Drinkers remained fundamentally righteous in their intentions and actions. This internal conflict created divisions within the Imperial Fists that would influence their future interactions with both Imperial authorities and their successor chapters. The deteriorating situation following the Phalanx incident accelerated Imperial efforts to locate and destroy the Soul Drinkers, as reports of their infiltration reached inquisitorial authorities who had been monitoring the chapter's activities since their initial classification as renegades. The breach of Imperial Fist security represented an unprecedented violation of Astartes' sanctuary that demanded immediate response. while the intelligence gathered during the infiltration suggested that the soul drinkers possessed knowledge that could compromise other experimental programs conducted under Imperial oversight. The Inquisition's response involved the deployment of multiple investigation teams supported by substantial military assets, including elements from several loyal Astartes chapters and specialized Imperial Guard regiments trained in counter-Astartes operations. Inquisitor Thaddeus of the Ordo Hereticus assumed primary responsibility for the Soul Drinkers' investigation, bringing decades of experience in hunting renegade space marines and extensive knowledge of genetic corruption patterns. His analysis of the available intelligence suggested that the Soul Drinkers represented a unique threat that combined the tactical capabilities of loyal Astartes with the unpredictability of mutated physiology and independent command structure. The Inquisitor's approach emphasized containment and elimination rather than capture and interrogation, as he believed that the chapter's mutations and psychological conditioning made them unsuitable for redemption through conventional means. The Imperial response to the Soul Drinkers' threat involved the coordination of multiple military assets across several sectors, creating a net of surveillance and interdiction that gradually restricted the Renegade chapter's operational freedom. Imperial Navy patrols increased their presence in systems where the Soul Drinkers had previously operated, while Adeptus Mechanicus facilities enhanced their security protocols to prevent further infiltration attempts. The campaign's scope reflected the Imperium's recognition that the Soul Drinkers posed a significant threat to Imperial security that required substantial resources to address effectively. The Soul Drinkers' response to this escalating Imperial pressure demonstrated their adaptation to the realities of sustained warfare against overwhelming odds. Sarpedon's tactical planning emphasized mobility and unpredictability, using the chapter's enhanced capabilities to avoid direct confrontation with superior Imperial forces while maintaining their operational effectiveness through targeted strikes against vulnerable Imperial assets. The chapter's strategy involved creating multiple false trails and deception operations that would divide Imperial attention while concealing their true movements and objectives. The first major engagement of this final campaign occurred when the Soul Drinkers encountered a strike force from the Crimson Fists chapter that had been dispatched to investigate reports of renegade activity in the low-key sector. The Crimson Fists represented another Imperial Fists successor chapter, whose tactical doctrine and genetic heritage closely paralleled the Soul Drinkers' own background, creating a confrontation between forces that shared fundamental similarities while serving opposing causes. The engagement took place within the asteroid belt surrounding the dead world of Vanqualis, where both forces had been drawn by intelligence reports suggesting the presence of archaeotech caches. The battle demonstrated the tactical evolution that had occurred within the Soul Drinkers during their years of independent operation, as they employed combat techniques that combined traditional Astartes doctrine with innovations developed through their unique experiences and enhanced capabilities. Sarpedon's mutations provided him with unprecedented mobility within the three-dimensional environment of the asteroid field, while his battle brothers utilized their transformed physiology to exploit weaknesses in Crimson Fists formations that had been optimized for conventional warfare. The engagement's outcome validated the Soul Drinkers' belief that their mutations provided practical advantages that justified their departure from orthodox Imperial doctrine. The Crimson Fists casualties during this engagement included Captain Cortez, a veteran officer whose death created significant political ramifications within Imperial command structures. The captain's reputation and his chapter's standing within the Imperial hierarchy meant that his loss could not be dismissed as an acceptable cost of routine operations, requiring explanations and justifications that highlighted the serious nature of the Soul Drinkers' threat. The incident provided Inquisitor Thaddeus with additional evidence supporting his arguments for increased resources and expanded authority in dealing with the Renegade chapter. The escalation of Imperial military response following the Crimson Fists engagement involved the deployment of specialized hunter-killer teams equipped with weapons and tactics specifically designed to counter enhanced Astartes opponents. These units included Deathwatch kill teams with experience fighting mutated space marines, Adeptus Mechanica Scutari forces equipped with advanced targeting systems, and Imperial Guard regiments that had been trained in anti-Astartes operations. The coordination of these diverse forces required extensive planning and resource allocation that demonstrated the Imperium's commitment to eliminating the Soul Drinkers' threat. The Soul Drinkers' discovery of the Imperial hunter-killer teams created new challenges for their operational security and survival, as these specialized units possessed knowledge of Astartes' capabilities and tactics that made them far more dangerous than conventional Imperial forces. The hunter-killer teams utilized advanced surveillance equipment and predictive algorithms that could anticipate renegade movements while deploying weapon systems specifically designed to penetrate Astartes' armor and neutralize enhanced physiology. The threat posed by these units forced the Soul Drinkers to modify their operational procedures while developing countermeasures that could neutralize the advantages provided by Imperial technological superiority. The chapter's response to the hunter-killer threat involved a series of preemptive strikes designed to eliminate these specialized units before they could coordinate effective operations against the renegade Astartes. The Soul Drinkers targeted Imperial supply depots, communication facilities, and staging areas that supported the hunter-killer teams, using their superior mobility and combat effectiveness to achieve tactical surprise while avoiding prolonged engagements that might expose them to Imperial reinforcements. These operations demonstrated the chapter's commitment to active resistance rather than passive evasion, establishing patterns of behavior that would define their final confrontation with Imperial authority. The most significant of these preemptive operations occurred when the Soul Drinkers assaulted an Imperial Guard fortress on the world of Selaka, their former recruiting ground that had been converted into a staging area for anti-Astartes operations. The fortress contained intelligence archives, specialized equipment, and personnel who had been specifically assigned to study the Soul Drinkers' capabilities and develop countermeasures. The assault required the Soul Drinkers to confront their own history while engaging Imperial forces that had been trained, using knowledge of their former operational patterns and tactical preferences. The battle for Selaka demonstrated the psychological impact of fighting on their former homeworld, as the Soul Drinkers found themselves engaged in combat within locations that held significant cultural and spiritual meaning for their chapter. The fortress had been constructed within the ruins of their former recruitment facilities, incorporating elements of their traditional architecture while serving as a base for operations designed to destroy them. This symbolic violation of their heritage created emotional responses that affected Battle Brothers' performance while providing additional motivation for their resistance to Imperial authority. The Imperial forces defending Selaka included elements from multiple hunter-killer teams supported by local PDF units that had been enhanced with specialized anti-Astartes equipment. The defenders utilized their knowledge of the Soul Drinkers' historical operational patterns to establish defensive positions that would channel the attacking forces into prepared kill zones, while minimizing the advantages provided by their enhanced mobility and combat capabilities. The fortress's design incorporated multiple layers of overlapping defenses that had been specifically configured to counter the tactical approaches that the Soul Drinkers had historically favored. Sarpedon's assault on the fortress command center required him to navigate through defensive systems that had been designed with specific knowledge of his capabilities and limitations. The Imperial defenders had studied recordings of his previous engagements, analyzing his movement patterns and tactical preferences to develop countermeasures that could neutralize his advantages while exploiting potential weaknesses in his approach. The confrontation tested his ability to adapt his fighting style while maintaining the aggressive tempo necessary for achieving his objectives before Imperial reinforcements could respond. The destruction of the Selaka fortress eliminated a significant Imperial intelligence asset while providing the Soul Drinkers with valuable information about the scope and nature of the campaign being conducted against them. The captured documents revealed the extent of Imperial knowledge about their capabilities and the resources that had been allocated for their elimination. This intelligence confirmed that the Imperium viewed them as a serious threat that required substantial investment to address, while also revealing potential vulnerabilities in the Imperial response that could be exploited during future operations. The aftermath of the Selaka assault marked a turning point in the campaign, as Imperial authorities recognized that conventional approaches to dealing with renegade Astartes were proving inadequate against opponents who possessed enhanced capabilities and detailed knowledge of Imperial tactics. Inquisitor Thaddeus requested additional resources and expanded authority to conduct more aggressive operations, while various Imperial military commands began coordinating their efforts to create a comprehensive response that could address the unique challenges posed by the Soul Drinker's mutations and operational methods. The Imperial response to this escalation involved the deployment of a massive task force that included elements from multiple Astartes chapters, Imperial Navy battle groups, and specialized inquisitorial assets. The task force's composition reflected the Imperium's recognition that eliminating the Soul Drinkers would require overwhelming force applied with coordination and precision that exceeded previous efforts. The operation's scale and complexity demanded extensive planning and resource allocation that demonstrated the serious nature of the threat that the Renegade chapter was perceived to represent. The Soul Drinkers' intelligence network detected the Imperial task force's formation and deployment, providing advance warning that allowed them to prepare for what they recognized would be their final confrontation with Imperial authority. Sarpedon's analysis of the available intelligence suggested that the Imperial forces possessed sufficient strength and coordination to eliminate his chapter through conventional military action, requiring innovative approaches that could exploit Imperial weaknesses while maximizing the advantages provided by their enhanced capabilities and operational flexibility. The chapter's preparation for this final confrontation involved the consolidation of their remaining resources and personnel while developing tactical plans that emphasized their unique strengths and the psychological impact of their mutations on Imperial forces. The Soul Drinkers recognized that their survival depended on their ability to inflict sufficient casualties on Imperial forces to force a reconsideration of the campaign's cost-effectiveness, while demonstrating their continued commitment to protecting humanity from its enemies. Their strategy involved creating multiple crisis points that would force Imperial commanders to divide their attention while preventing the concentration of overwhelming force against any single target. The deployment of the Imperial task force created a siege situation that gradually restricted the Soul Drinkers' operational freedom while increasing the pressure on their limited resources and personnel. The Imperial forces established blockades and patrol patterns that made it increasingly difficult for the Renegade chapter to conduct resupply operations or maintain their network of hidden bases and supply caches. The siege's progression demonstrated the Imperium's commitment to eliminating the Soul Drinkers regardless of the cost, while testing the chapter's ability to maintain cohesion and effectiveness under extreme pressure. The Soul Drinkers' response to the Imperial siege involved a series of breakout operations designed to disrupt enemy coordination while maintaining their operational capability through mobility and unpredictability. These operations targeted Imperial command and control systems, supply lines, and communication networks that were essential for maintaining the siege's effectiveness. The chapter's enhanced capabilities provided significant advantages in these operations, allowing them to achieve tactical surprise while inflicting disproportionate casualties on Imperial forces that had been trained to counter conventional Astartes tactics. The psychological impact of these operations on Imperial forces demonstrated the effectiveness of the Soul Drinkers' transformation in creating fear and uncertainty among opponents who had been conditioned to view Space Marines as predictable adversaries. The Renegade chapter's mutations and enhanced capabilities created visual and tactical effects that exceeded Imperial expectations, while their continued adherence to recognizable tactical doctrines created confusion about their true nature and intentions. This psychological warfare proved as effective as their physical capabilities in disrupting Imperial operations and forcing enemy commanders to reconsider their assumptions about the nature of their opponents. The climactic phase of the campaign began when Imperial forces succeeded in tracking the Soul Drinkers to their primary base of operations, a hidden facility within the asteroid belt of the Viridian system. The base had been constructed within a hollowed-out asteroid that provided natural protection against detection while offering multiple escape routes and defensive positions. The facility contained the chapter's remaining gene seed stocks, sacred relics, and essential personnel who had been concentrated for protection during the final stages of the Imperial siege. The Imperial assault on the Viridian base involved coordinated attacks by multiple Astartes chapters supported by Imperial Navy bombardment and specialized inquisitorial forces. The attacking forces included elements from the Imperial Fists, Crimson Fists, and several other successor chapters, whose genetic heritage and tactical doctrine closely paralleled the Soul Drinkers' own capabilities. The assault's coordination required extensive planning and resource allocation that demonstrated the Imperium's commitment to eliminating the Renegade chapter, regardless of the cost in personnel and equipment. The defense of the Viridian base represented the Soul Drinkers' final stand against overwhelming Imperial forces, as they utilized every advantage provided by their mutations and enhanced capabilities, while fighting to protect their remaining personnel and sacred relics. The battle's progression demonstrated the chapter's tactical evolution during their years of independent operation, as they employed combat techniques that combined traditional Astartes doctrine with innovations developed through their unique experiences and enhanced physiology. The engagement tested their ability to maintain unit cohesion and effectiveness while facing opponents who possessed superior numbers and resources. Chaplain Ictinos played a crucial role during the final battle, providing spiritual leadership and psychological support to battle brothers who faced the prospect of death or capture at the hands of their former allies. The chaplain's theological framework for understanding the chapter's mutations and their separation from Imperial authority provided essential psychological anchoring that prevented demoralization despite the overwhelming odds they faced. His presence on the battlefield demonstrated the chapter's continued commitment to their beliefs, while validating their interpretation of the Emperor's will through personal sacrifice and dedication. The battle's intensity and duration exceeded anything the Soul Drinkers had previously experienced, as Imperial forces demonstrated their commitment to eliminating the Renegade chapter through sustained assault operations that continued despite heavy casualties. The Imperial commanders recognized that the Soul Drinkers' enhanced capabilities and defensive advantages made conventional assault tactics extremely costly, but their orders required the chapter's complete elimination regardless of the price. The engagement's progression revealed the fundamental incompatibility between the Soul Drinkers' evolution and the Imperium's requirements for conformity and obedience. Sarpedon's final confrontation with his past occurred when he faced Captain Lysander of the Imperial Fists, who had been assigned to lead the assault on the Viridian base despite his previous encounter with the Soul Drinkers' chapter master during the Phalanx incident. The confrontation between these two warriors represented the broader conflict between traditional Imperial values and the adaptive evolution that the Soul Drinkers believed was necessary for humanity's survival. Their battle demonstrated the tragic nature of the conflict, while highlighting the irreconcilable differences between their respective interpretations of duty and loyalty. The engagement between Sarpedon and Lysander tested both warriors' capabilities, while symbolizing the broader philosophical conflict that had led to the Soul Drinkers' separation from Imperial authority. The Imperial Fists captain's tactical discipline and superior equipment were balanced by Sarpedon's enhanced agility and precognitive abilities, creating a prolonged confrontation that demonstrated the fundamental compatibility between their fighting styles despite their opposing allegiances. The battle's outcome would determine not only their personal fates, but also the symbolic meaning of the Soul Drinkers' resistance to imperial authority. The progressive collapse of the Soul Drinkers' defensive positions forced the chapter's remaining personnel to make desperate choices about their survival and their commitment to their beliefs. Some battle brothers chose to fight to the death rather than surrender to imperial forces, while others attempted to escape the base through hidden routes that might allow them to continue their resistance elsewhere. The chapter's dissolution occurred gradually, as individual squads and battle brothers were overwhelmed by imperial forces or chose to abandon their positions when continued resistance became impossible. The fate of the chapter's surviving members varied according to their individual circumstances and the specific imperial forces they encountered during the base's final collapse. Some were captured alive and subjected to interrogation and potential rehabilitation, while others managed to escape the immediate battle zone and disappear into the broader galaxy, where they might continue their independent existence. The chapter's sacred relics, including the Soul Spear, were either destroyed during the fighting or captured by Imperial forces for study and potential disposal, according to inquisitorial protocols. The destruction of the Soul Drinkers' final stronghold at Viridian marked the end of one of the most complex and tragic chapters in the annals of Space Marine history, yet their legacy would resonate through Imperial doctrine and Astartes culture for centuries to come. The chapter's transformation from loyal servants of the Emperor into renegade warriors who maintained their essential righteousness, while rejecting imperial authority, created unprecedented challenges for imperial theologians, military commanders, and the broader Adeptus Astartes, who struggled to categorize their fall within existing frameworks of loyalty and heresy. The immediate aftermath of the Viridian campaign forced imperial authorities to confront fundamental questions about the nature of Space Marine loyalty and the appropriate responses to genetic deviation within the Astartes ranks. The Soul Drinkers had demonstrated that physical mutation did not necessarily correlate with spiritual corruption, while their continued effectiveness against chaos forces proved that enhanced capabilities could serve the Emperor's will even when divorced from imperial institutional authority. These revelations challenged the rigid categorizations that had previously defined imperial responses to renegade chapters, requiring new approaches to evaluating loyalty and determining appropriate punishments for deviation from orthodox doctrine. Inquisitor Thaddeus's final report on the Soul Drinkers' investigation became a foundational document for imperial policy regarding mutated space marines and the treatment of chapters that displayed signs of genetic instability. The report's conclusions emphasized the danger of allowing any deviation from established genetic templates, arguing that the Soul Drinkers' initial acceptance of beneficial mutations had created a precedent that could lead other chapters to embrace similar transformations. Thaddeus recommended increased surveillance of all Space Marine chapters, mandatory genetic screening procedures, and immediate intervention at the first signs of deviation from approved parameters. The Inquisitor's recommendations reflected broader imperial concerns about the potential for genetic corruption to spread through the Astartes ranks, if not addressed with absolute vigilance and decisive action. The Soul Drinkers' resistance to chaos corruption had initially suggested that their mutations might be beneficial, but their eventual rebellion against imperial authority demonstrated that genetic deviation inevitably led to broader challenges to established order. The report argued that the Emperor's design for Space Marines was perfect and complete, making any modification or enhancement a form of corruption that threatened the fundamental integrity of the Astartes project. The implementation of these recommendations resulted in significant changes to imperial oversight of Space Marine chapters, including the establishment of new monitoring protocols and the expansion of inquisitorial authority over genetic matters. The Adeptus Mechanicus was tasked with developing enhanced detection systems that could identify genetic anomalies before they manifested as visible mutations, while the Inquisition received additional resources for investigating chapters that displayed unusual characteristics or capabilities. These measures created a climate of suspicion and surveillance that affected all Space Marine chapters, regardless of their loyalty or service record. The theological implications of the Soul Drinker's story created profound challenges for imperial religious doctrine and the understanding of the Emperor's will regarding human evolution and enhancement. Chaplain Ictinos' theological framework, which had justified the chapter's mutations as divine gifts rather than corruption, represented a dangerous precedent that could undermine fundamental imperial beliefs about the sanctity of the human form. The chapter's ability to maintain their essential humanity while undergoing radical physical transformation challenged traditional interpretations of purity and corruption that formed the foundation of imperial religious thought. The ecclesiarchy's response to these theological challenges involved the development of new doctrinal statements that emphasized the perfection of the Emperor's original design for humanity and the danger of attempting to improve upon divine creation. These statements characterized the Soul Drinker's mutations as temptations that had tested their spiritual strength, with their eventual rebellion serving as proof that deviation from the Emperor's template inevitably led to corruption and heresy. The official position maintained that true loyalty to the Emperor required acceptance of human limitations and rejection of any enhancement that was not explicitly sanctioned by imperial authority. The broader implications of this theological position extended beyond the immediate question of genetic mutation to encompass fundamental issues about the nature of human evolution and the appropriate limits of technological enhancement. The Soul Drinker's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking to transcend human limitations through artificial means, while their resistance to chaos corruption was reinterpreted as temporary protection that would inevitably fail as their deviation from the Emperor's design increased. This interpretation reinforced existing imperial prejudices against technological enhancement, while providing justification for increased surveillance and control over populations that might be tempted to pursue similar transformations. The impact of the Soul Drinker's legacy on Space Marine recruitment and training procedures reflected imperial concerns about preventing similar deviations from occurring in other chapters. The Adeptus Astartes implemented new screening procedures designed to identify candidates who might be susceptible to genetic instability or psychological factors that could lead to rebellion against imperial authority. These procedures included extensive psychological evaluation, genetic analysis, and monitoring of candidates' responses to authority figures and institutional structures. The training modifications that resulted from the Soul Drinker's example emphasized absolute loyalty to imperial doctrine and the dangers of questioning established authority, even when such questioning might seem justified by tactical or strategic considerations. Neophytes received additional indoctrination regarding the importance of genetic purity and the spiritual dangers associated with physical mutation, while veteran battle brothers underwent periodic evaluation to ensure their continued adherence to orthodox beliefs and practices. These measures created a more rigid and controlled environment within Space Marine chapters that prioritized conformity over innovation and individual initiative. The influence of the Soul Drinker's tactical innovations on broader Astartes doctrine remained limited due to imperial concerns about the source of these developments and their potential connection to the chapter's eventual rebellion. The psychological warfare techniques that had made the Soul Drinkers effective against various enemies were analyzed and documented, but their implementation was restricted to specialized units under direct inquisitorial oversight. The enhanced mobility and combat effectiveness demonstrated by mutated battle brothers were studied for potential applications, but research into similar enhancements was classified and conducted under strict security protocols. The chapter's resistance to chaos corruption became a subject of intense study within imperial research facilities, as scientists and theologians sought to understand the mechanisms that had protected the soul drinkers from spiritual contamination despite their physical mutations. The research revealed that their protection appeared to be linked to their connection with ancient artifacts and their strong belief in serving the Emperor's will, factors that had created psychological and spiritual barriers against chaos influence. However, the researchers concluded that these protective factors were insufficient to justify the risks associated with genetic modification, as the soul drinkers' eventual rebellion demonstrated that mutation inevitably led to broader challenges to imperial authority. The fate of surviving soul drinkers became a matter of significant concern for imperial authorities, as scattered battle brothers who had escaped the Viridian assault represented potential sources of contamination and rebellion throughout the galaxy. The Inquisition implemented extensive search operations designed to locate and capture these survivors, while Imperial Guard units received training in identifying and engaging mutated space marines who might attempt to blend into normal human populations. The survivors' knowledge of Imperial tactics and their enhanced capabilities made them particularly dangerous opponents who required specialized countermeasures and significant resources to neutralize. The documentation of the Soul Drinker's story within Imperial Archives created a complex legacy that served multiple purposes within the broader context of Imperial education and indoctrination. The chapter's transformation and eventual destruction became required study material for Imperial officers, inquisitorial acolytes, and space marine chaplains who needed to understand the warning signs of genetic corruption and the appropriate responses to such threats. The story's presentation emphasized the tragic nature of the chapter's fall, while reinforcing the importance of absolute loyalty to Imperial doctrine and the dangers of questioning established authority. The broader impact of the Soul Drinker's legacy on Imperial military doctrine reflected concerns about the potential for similar rebellions to occur within other elite units that possess the capability to challenge Imperial authority. The chapter's effectiveness against Imperial forces during their final campaign demonstrated that enhanced space marines could pose serious threats to Imperial security if they chose to rebel against established order. This realization led to the development of new protocols for monitoring elite units and the implementation of safeguards designed to prevent the concentration of power and resources that might enable successful rebellion. The psychological impact of the Soul Drinker's story on other Space Marine chapters varied according to their individual circumstances and their relationships with Imperial authority. Some chapters viewed the story as validation of their own loyalty and adherence to orthodox doctrine, using the Soul Drinker's fate as evidence of the importance of maintaining genetic purity and institutional obedience. Other chapters, particularly those that had experienced their own challenges with genetic stability or Imperial oversight, found the story troubling and potentially relevant to their own circumstances. The influence of the Soul Drinker's example on subsequent Space Marine chapters manifested in various ways, including increased emphasis on genetic monitoring, enhanced chaplain oversight of Battle Brothers' spiritual development, and more rigorous enforcement of Imperial doctrine within chapter culture and training. These changes reflected broader Imperial concerns about preventing similar deviations, while ensuring that Space Marine chapters remained reliable instruments of Imperial will rather than independent forces that might challenge established authority. The long-term implications of the Soul Drinker's legacy extended beyond immediate military and theological considerations to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of human evolution and the appropriate limits of enhancement within Imperial society. The chapter's story became a touchstone for debates about genetic modification, technological enhancement, and the balance between individual capability and institutional loyalty that would influence Imperial policy for centuries to come. Their resistance to chaos corruption while maintaining their essential humanity challenged existing assumptions about the relationship between physical form and spiritual integrity, creating ongoing tensions within imperial doctrine that could not be easily resolved. The Soul Drinkers' final legacy lay not in their achievements or their failures, but in the questions they raised about the nature of loyalty, the limits of acceptable deviation, and the appropriate responses to change within the rigid structures of imperial society. Their story served as both warning and inspiration, demonstrating the dangers of challenging established authority while also revealing the potential for beneficial evolution that existed within the human template. The chapter's destruction eliminated an immediate threat to imperial stability, but the ideas and precedents they had established would continue to influence imperial policy and Astartes' culture long after their final battle had ended. The memory of the Soul Drinkers became a complex symbol within imperial culture, representing both the tragic consequences of deviation from orthodox doctrine and the potential for transcendence that existed within the Emperor's design for humanity. Their story reminded imperial citizens and servants of the importance of loyalty and obedience, while also suggesting that the Emperor's will might manifest in ways that challenged conventional understanding and institutional authority. This dual legacy ensured that the Soul Drinkers would be remembered not merely as another fallen chapter, but as a cautionary tale about the eternal tension between order and evolution that defined the human condition within the grim darkness of the 41st millennium.